All right, thanks for coming along, everyone. Thanks first to the Cross family for hosting us today. It's yeah, good spot, so really happy to be here. Thank you to growers for coming out, and also for our presenters of Dean Izzard, ZADCO. We've got Nick Hall from Syngenta. Then we'll have James Stacey come in, and then Peter Norwood will be here around 11 or past 10, 11 o'clock. So we've got a lot to get through today. So we'll have a break halfway through. So once Nick does his presentation, we'll have a break. So without further ado, I'd like to present Dean Izzard from ZADCO. Talk about plant nutrition. Thanks.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks again for FPAG for having us here, and all the speakers, and for you guys giving up your time. It's always a privilege to come and talk to guys like yourselves. We know that you've got lots on through the years, so thank you for giving up your time. I'm just going to, those that don't know us, I think most people here probably haven't heard of ZADCO. There are a couple of growers that I've met here over the years. So I'll just give you a really quick history lesson. ZADCO started in 1990. Our focus, pretty much since day one, the owner has been on looking at soil and root health, looking at as for the foundation and key of everything that we do, and then we look at targeted nutrition. You guys are going to have the best nutrition programs in place, but if you've got really poor root health, then you're obviously going to have a hard time to be able to achieve what you want to achieve through the season. Our parent company is JH Biotech over in the States, and to date they hold 11 world patents. They're now classified the largest certified organic company in the US. They do animal products, human products, and also plant products. So not all products that they sell are organic, but a big focus what they do is in that space. Probably the key patent that they hold is what we call glycine chelation. So the actual company, John Su, the owner, founded JH Biotech on glycine technology. So I'll just give you a quick run through. I hope the wording's large enough for you guys to see, so I do apologise if it's not. Why the focus is glycine is because glycine is the smallest amino acid found in plants. It's about half to 1/3 the size smaller of most other amino acids that you find in plants, and up to 5 times smaller than your main non-organic chelating agents. So if you look at glycine, the rate is 75 grams per mole. That's just how they measure molecular weight. And if you look at probably two of the most common non-organic chelating agents, your EDTAs and your EDDHAs, as you can see, the glycine is much smaller. Now, when John Su came up with the glycine chelation, using amino acids wasn't new. It wasn't new in the space of chelation, but he was the one that founded using glycine as the main chelating agent. And that is critical purely, as I've mentioned, because of its size. It can actually pass through the cell wall membranes. It doesn't require the holes in the leaves to be open. So any systemic product that you guys apply have to go through the holes in the leaves, because that molecules that you apply are so large. So it'll pass through the green stems, leaves, flowers, and fruit skin. So even our vitamin calcium, which is chelated the same way, that will, when you do it as a foliar, it'll actually pass through the skins of your fruit, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. We guarantee 90 to 95% uptake within 3 to 5 hours, so you'll get a really fast response, whether you spray day or night time. So anytime you spray at night, whatever you spray at night is not able to be taken up through the leaf, because those holes in the leaves aren't open during the night. They're only open when the sun comes up. So whenever you spray at night time, whatever you spray will sit on the leaf until the next day. The sun comes up, the plant can then take it in. So even with our trace minerals and calcium, you spray it at night time, we will still guarantee 90 to 95% uptake within that 3 to 5 hour range. They're 100% salt free, so you'll get no chance of burn even in heat. Not that you guys would normally spray in hot weather, but generally if you spray a nutrient or a product that burns, quite often it's the salt content of that product that you're applying that will react with the heat and cause a burn. And glycine is also YAN, so it's yeast available nitrogen, which obviously is critical for the whole wine making process. So it has a lot of benefits based around it. So I'm just going to look at the importance of targeted nutrition. Every time you guys fertilise your plant, you actually manipulate it and tell it what you want it to do at every single stage of the growth. If you look at nitrogen, if you guys put on the right amount of nitrogen at the right amount of time, you're going to get the right amount of leaf growth, stem growth, flower, and also fruit quality at the end of the season. If you put on the wrong amount of nitrogen at the wrong time, obviously you can have the opposite effect. So every time you guys put out any fertilizer at whatever time of season, you're actually telling your vines what you want them to do. So when you look at the actual timing, you've got to get that timing right of whatever nutrient or mineral that you're applying to make sure that you can maximise. If you miss that timing, then potentially you might not maximise what you're trying to achieve. The amount of fertiliser that you guys apply. Obviously this is all relative to the season with rain and temperatures and things like that. So I do understand that, but this is something that you guys can control. So generally, if you feed your vines well, they will feed you well. And also the quality of fertiliser that you use. There's quite a vast difference in the quality of fertilisers out there. So you have to look at to make sure that the fertilisers you guys use for your conditions, like your soil pHs, if you have acid soils, if you have alkaline soils, you've got to make sure that you're using the right fertilisers. And also how easy can that plant utilise it as well. All of these things play a huge part in the overall outcome that you guys want to achieve. At ZADCO, because we're all about targeted nutrition and want to make sure that you guys can maximise your outcome, I guess we look at doing different leaf testings at certain times. The first one we look at is doing a dry leaf matter test around 2 to 3 weeks before flowering, because obviously with flowering you want to make sure all your critical trace minerals, specifically minerals like zinc and boron, are in that right range. We then look at verazon, because obviously that's when you all the processes that you're trying to achieve within the berries are starting to happen. So we want to make sure that levels are right at that stage. And then also post-harvest. We actually do a lot of work with a lot of growers, and our post-harvest programs or applications that we recommend are just as solid as what we use in the season. Because if you can put your vines to bed full for the next season, when you do your early spring applications for next season, you're not topping up what the vines used last season. You're actually starting to put different minerals and different nutrients into luxury levels to make sure that first lot of spring growth is nice and strong. So if we look at, say, phosphorus. Phosphorus is obviously the nutrient that you guys would use early because it helps to wake up the vines. It gives the vines the energy that it needs to start the season. I guess it's like coffee. Who here drinks coffee in the morning? I can see this man. He's had one. Everyone else, most people. Why? Because that wakes us up. So for myself, this is how I look every morning before I've had one. So I then have my coffee, and generally that's how I end up looking after my coffee. Unfortunately, at the moment, I'm using cream for my face to look at different skin cancers, hence why I look a bit manky. So most mornings, that's how I look when I wake up now. So phosphorus. Like we said, it obviously transfers all the energy to every process that is about to take place for the season. Obviously stimulates that first flush, and it's the energy for cells to start to divide. So every process that the plant goes through from root development, foliage, stems, flowers, fruit, it's actually within the plant, those cells needing to divide, and obviously calcium is critical for that, which I'll explain later. And phosphorus is actually critical for starch as well later in the season, and for sugar accumulation. You know, as we know, the springtime here, you've got every major process in the vines happening in spring. You've got your first root flush, you've got your shoot growth, you've got flowering, fruit set, and then obviously laying down your buds for the next season. So that's why nutrients like phosphorus and calcium are critical for that springtime application, because you need good levels of phosphorus and good levels of calcium to help with every single process that's happening. I actually did a talk yesterday up in the Riverlands on things like this, but I focused heavily on the importance of calcium in vines. I'm not going to focus as much on it today, but calcium for wine grape growers probably isn't as much of a focus as what it is for other aspects of port. And calcium for you guys should take a little bit more priority with what you guys do, because of the importance of it. I guess most guys here would do a calcium nitrate early through the season just to get things moving, but we also will look at some other calcium applications. Potassium is important for the formation of proteins, carbohydrates and fats, so that's all got to do with your energy stores within the plant. Regulates water movement coming in and out of the leaves through the holes in the leaves. It thickens and strengthens your cell walls. So potassium plays a really big part in making sure that you can get the maximum size out of your fruit that you need. And then obviously critical for starch and sugars later on in the season. Calcium, like I mentioned before, it's critical for cell division. Cell division will stop within the plant if you're deficient in calcium. So if you guys want to maximize every growth section of your plant, you need luxury levels of calcium, or it will actually stop. And like we mentioned before, it's critical for all those areas within the plant. So potentially you can have a reduction in yield at the start of the season because you're low in calcium, because those cells when you're going through a fruit set, if you don't maximize the amount of cell division that's happening at fruit set, you can see an actual reduction because those cells aren't going to divide to their absolute maximum. So calcium critical for every stage. Trace elements. These can obviously be applied early in the season through your complete fertilizers. Certain minerals like your zinc, boron, copper, manganese and calcium have shown within the plant to actually help fight against certain pathogens like powdery mildew, botrytis and bacterial cankers. So if you're deficient in specific trace minerals, not that if you're in luxury levels that you can stop these from happening, but you can actually minimise the amount of pathogen attack that is out there due to certain trace minerals. Your trace minerals through the soil are obviously very dependent. Same thing with calcium, and you have a lot of different limitations within the soil for calcium uptake and other trace mineral uptake. Your pH levels is probably one of the most important. So at a pH of around 8.5, around 80% of all nutrients and minerals you guys apply gets lost to the soil, up to 80% at a pH of around 8 to 8.5. So the pH and knowing your soil pH plays a huge part in to be able to maximise the nutrients and minerals that you guys are applying through your soil. Interactions with high minerals and nutrients in the soil. If you've got a lot of phosphorus in your soil, specifically in a lot of the high calcareous soils up in the riverlands, they have a lot of phosphorus. When they're putting out their calcium, relatively quick they'll form calcium phosphate in the soil. Now our bone density is made up of calcium phosphate. Calcium phosphate is what gives our bones its strength. So when you've got calcium phosphate in the soil, that's exactly what's going on in the soil, and nutrients and minerals will get locked up extremely quickly if you have high phosphorus. If you're more in the acidic range and you've got high phosphorus, you'll get iron phosphate, you'll get aluminium phosphate, zinc phosphate. So you've really got to understand your soil and what you're applying to make sure you can maximise the amount of nutrient and mineral uptake. Soil temperature, moisture. So obviously anytime you want to get nutrients into the plant, you need moisture in your soil profile. So that's why good irrigation methods are so critical, not just to water the plant, but you need that soil moisture to actually deliver those nutrients to those plant root systems. So all those things are critical. Poor root health. If you've got waterlogging or your soil's too dry, you're obviously going to have an impact on that root zone. And if you look at something like calcium, calcium can only be taken up at one point along that root system. And if you look at the root tip, which is called the root apex, about 1 to 2 centimetres back from that root tip is the only point on that whole root system that the plant can take up calcium. So if you have weak root systems due to, like I said before, waterlogging pathogens or even high salts, they'll all affect that root tip. You start affecting that root tip, then you start to affect the amount of calcium that will actually be taken up. So having that good, strong, healthy root system is really critical for everything that you guys need to do. Having low microbes in your soil will also potentially reduce your nutrient uptake. Nutrients like urea, they need to be worked on by specific biologicals in the soil to become plant available, because urea in the form that it's in cannot be taken up by the plant. So you need good soil health. And obviously any of these minerals and calcium can be corrected through foliar. So why do we do foliar? Because you can deliver the trace elements and nutrients at the right time. You've got a much faster uptake. You've got a larger surface area to maximize the amount of nutrient and minerals, and you can also bypass all the limiting factors of the soil that we just discussed. Like I mentioned before, we look at doing a leaf analysis 2 to 3 weeks pre-flower. Gives you enough time to fix up any deficiencies that might be happening. Because just by being deficient in some of your minerals, again, you're not going to maximize the amount of flowering that you can achieve. So zinc and boron are the 2 minerals that have the most impact. So zinc is critical for the plant reproductive. It's important to help initiate flowering and floral development. So zinc is really critical for the overall health. If males and females are trying to have a baby and they're not having much success, the males actually get injected with zinc. That's part of the process. So it just shows that if you want your flowers to be fertile, zinc pre-flower is really important for that. Boron obviously increases your production and retention. If you're low in boron, you'll also affect pollination, and you will incomplete pollination if you are deficient in boron. Obviously helps with normal flower set and fruit set. And the boron gives the cells, makes the cells more elastic. So once you're going through the cell division during fruit set, and then they start to stretch, then the boron in those in the cells actually help those cells to be quite elastic and make sure that they don't split. Foliar calcium. Like we said before, calcium is the hardest element or nutrient to actually take up from the plant. There's so many limiting factors in the soil that will reduce calcium uptake. Calcium in the soil is still critical. It's important. Foliar calciums do not replace any of the calcium in your soil, especially if you're trying to leach salts out of your soil profile. This will not replace that. This is just purely about targeting calcium at the right time to maximise the benefit. Calcium only moves up. It only moves through the xylem. It cannot be translocated, so it can't move back down. And the plant only takes calcium up when it's transpiring, so when it's releasing moisture to keep cool. And there's a lot of limiting factors that will stop that process. So when it's really hot and your plants shut down, they hold on to moisture and they don't transpire. It's a self-protection mechanism. So they stop releasing moisture. So with that, you don't have any water being drawn up, which means you don't have any calcium being drawn up to keep your fruit nice and firm. And certainly mid to late season, when you guys are holding on your whole crop, is when you guys get that real heat. That's when you can start to see your fruit going soft, is because it's not drawing calcium up from the soil. When it's cold, not that this affects you guys because your plants are dormant. Dormant plants don't transpire. They aren't hot. They don't have to sweat to keep cool. So again, they're not drawing up calcium. Or when it's humid. So you guys are probably a little bit more humid here to the area that I spoke to yesterday up in the Riverlands. When there's a lot of humidity in the air, you've got a lot of moisture around that leaf surface. That helps to keep the plant cool. So the plant's not drawing up moisture to keep cool, so again, it's not going to draw up the calcium. Certain pathogens will release certain substances to break down cell walls, so certain bacteria and fungi. If you can get good calcium levels within your plant, it makes that process much harder for that to take place. So we do our for layer calciums, we do the first one at fruit set and then the next one 2 to 3 weeks later. Why? Because all your cell division for your fruit happens within the first 21 days. Once that 21-day period is up, then the cell walls start to stretch. So we look at targeting the calcium in there to maximise the amount of calcium that you've got, to maximise cell division. So once those berries start to stretch, then you've got good levels of calcium. Like I said before, low calcium at that time, the cell division within the plant can stop. Can calcium help with botrytis prevention? Yes, it can. Why? Because when you're deficient in calcium or low in calcium, your cell walls are weak. When your berries split, the cells are actually imploding on each other, so they just keep imploding like this because they're weak. That then becomes an infection point for any botrytis that's around. Now, botrytis is probably the second or third most common fungi. Well, it's not really a fungi, it's more of a mold, but it's the second or third most common call it fungi or spore in nature. Pretty much every tree, every plant, all your grasses is a host for botrytis. It's everywhere. Every time you go through your vineyard to spray pesticide or fungicide, to mow, to do whatever, you have spores on the vineyard floor, they just come up. They're probably the one or the top two lightest spore in nature. It is why botrytis is so hard to kill, because it's always there and it's always in the atmosphere. When you get the rain and the wind, that's why you get a lot of botrytis coming after that, because that wind is blowing those spores off the trees, off the grass. It's everywhere. It's why it's really, really hard to control, but it needs that entry point. And when you got that weak cell, that's when it happens. This is a trial we did in a university, Lincoln University in New Zealand, and we did this on an organic vineyard to look at using our Biomin calcium, which they did as a foliar, to see how much of a reduction we can get through the season and towards the end of the season for botrytis. And I'll just quickly read it out. In trials that began in the lab, then moved on to potted vine, small plot trials, and finally grower trials, the use of calcium reduced botrytis levels significantly. We used Biomin calcium, put 3 applications on, some growers applied 2. Although the research showing that 4 was needed, basically they were applied at 14-day intervals, and they had an average reduction of 48%. That's a huge reduction. Why? Because we thickened the cell walls, we reduced the amount of entry points that were there, or wounds, just by making sure those skins were thick. Is this going to stop botrytis? Is this going to stop you doing your sprays through the season? No, it's not. But it's a pretty good insurance policy to be adding with your fungicide sprays to help through the season. Thanks for coming, Jock. Do you want to take over now?
Yes.
No worries. Not much. They're all asleep, so no worries.
Can I just ask, is that still starting, if you do that rotation every 14 days, is that still only starting at fruit set?
Yeah, so those, well,
After flower?
yes.
When flower is finished?
Yes, correct. Yes, absolutely. So if you increase your calciums, you're obviously going to strengthen the cell walls. If you harvest your fruit when it's been really hot, as soon as you take your fruit off the vine, those cells start breaking down. Every time you take any fruit, any flower, anything from its source or strength, the cell walls start breaking down straight away. The more calcium you have, the longer that process takes. So obviously you guys are harvesting at times when it's pretty hot. If there's lower levels in your fruit, then potentially those berries can break down faster when they're stored in the vat. So things like that are just something worthwhile to look at. So I'm just going to look at biological control agents. Anyone that grew up in the 80s knows that this guy was the most famous control agents of them all, and he was a dumbass. Thankfully, the biological control agents I'm going to talk about aren't as dumb as Maxwell Smart. What are they? Basically, we're looking at using bacteria and fungi, whether they be in the soil, whether they be over the top, to look at reducing the incidences and the severity of the pathogens that can affect your crop. Your biologicals can reduce the overall inoculum level, so the overall disease pressure in your soil profile. Chemistry can't do that unless you fumigate. But even fumigating, if you miss little areas of the soil, your pathogens that are in that section, because they're there, are going to come back. And the problem is, when they come back, you have low beneficials to keep them at bay. So even fumigating doesn't get rid of all of them. So we look at using biologicals to reduce the severity, to make sure and increase the efficacies of the chemistries that you guys use. Even though our focus is biologicals, we aren't dumb enough or stupid enough to say this is all you have to use. If you're organic, you have no other choice. But we're not about saying you've got to stop using chemistry, but you can use biologicals in what you do to increase the efficacies of the chemistries that you use. No time in history has this biological space been so much spoken about. You've got every major chemical company that is now coming into this space. Why? Because chemistries are getting less, so these big chemical companies are coming into this space. They're being reactive into this space to help keep their chemistries in the marketplace longer. We're not reactive, we're proactive. We've been in this space for a long time. They can be used all round, but you have to understand which ones you want to look at using all year round. Bacterias you can use as low as 3 or 4 degrees. Your trichodermas, probably a little bit more girly. Is she going to respond? No. They probably only want no less than about 10 or 12 degrees. So they're a lot more affected by temperature. So you have to understand what you're going to use. They're also classified reduced risk. ZADCO's history. So our parent company, JH Biotech, developed their first trichoderma, Tri-D25, in 1982. That's when it became commercially available. They had been working on it since the late 70s. So they've been in this space pretty much longer than most companies around the world. They developed Trichoderma caningii and Trichoderma harzianum, and that product was brought to Australia in 1990. That was the first product the owner of ZADCO brought to Australia, and the whole company's been founded on that product. We started botrytis management trials back in 2003-04 with Dr. Mary Cole to look at getting this registered as a biofungicide. The problem is, back then the APVMA had no framework. They didn't know how to register biologicals as biofungicide. They kept treating it like a chemistry. Didn't work, so we weren't actually able to get it registered. JH Biotech's the only company to get the Trichoderma caningii and harzianum coexist in one product, and that's critical, and I'll explain a little bit later. There is other products out there that have the caningii and harzianum, but they're in separate products. We developed the first single-strand Bacillus subtilis back in 2002. We were the first company to have one here in Australia, and we were the first to get it tried and tested as a curative for Phytophthora through Sydney University. Most other companies up until that point and today look at using them as a preventative, which they work really well at, but we were actually the first to get it tried and tested for the control. How do they work? You get direct competition, antibiosis, predation, mycoparasitism, and induced systemic resistance. So it basically tells the plant that it's coming under attack, so the plant kicks its own self-defense mechanism in. This is some work that we did with Dr. Len Tesoriero to look at using full zyme as a curative for Pythium. This is a slide or a photo that was taken under an electron microscope. This is the end of a root tip. So bacteria will colonise around a root system. You do not have to feed bacteria out in the soil profile. Why? Because they feed off the exudates of plant roots. That's their food source. That's how they survive. And in return, they produce up to 3 or 4 different kinds of antibiotics at one time. So you've got multiple actions happening. This light brown area is those exact substances that have been produced by the antibiotics. So it coats the root system. It puts that zone of inhibition around the root. And these little dots here are all actual Pythium spores trying to penetrate and get into that root tip. But because of that zone of inhibition that's been placed around that root system, they can't get in. So it will work as a preventative or a protective, but if those spores try to get in and to get that root system, then they will obviously die. So that's how antibiotics work. They produce those substances. This is just a really quick video just to show you how quick bacteria can spread. I'm hoping.
Bacteria reproduce very simply and rapidly by doubling their contents and splitting in two. Just one bacterium, dividing every 20 minutes, could produce nearly 5,000 billion bacteria in one day.
So these little bastards spread very fast. So you start with one bacterium splitting every 20 minutes, reproduce itself 5,000 billion times in one day. So they spread extremely fast. So this is a photo under electric, how do you say it? Anyway, microscope. This is Pythium strain down through here. That snake-like effect is the trichoderma that wraps itself around it. So it's actually parasitizing that strain. If you look here, and I'll go into some more depth later, that snake-like effect, trichodermas have a couple of modes of actions, and one of them is they produce a very strong substance called chitinase. Chitinase breaks down chitin. Fungal cell walls, the main ingredient in fungal cell walls is chitin. So they produce this chitinase, weakens the cell walls. These two little holes here, that's when the trichoderma gets inside and actually feeds off that pathogen from the inside out. So this is actually a photograph of our Tri-D25 parasitizing botrytis pathogen. So again, you've got your botrytis here. That snake-like effect, again, that's the trichoderma. That's actually inside. That's not sitting on the outside. So that's actually gone inside that pathogen and is actively feeding it from the inside out. That's how fast and aggressive these are. This is just another one where you got the trichoderma, which is coiling itself around. This is rhizoctonia, so it's actually wrapped itself around the pathogen, and it's basically eating it from the inside out. What's their role? Trichodermas, you find them in the soil. They naturally occur in the soil. They will help unlock nutrients within your soil profile. So as they're actively breaking down the organic matter in your soil profile, they will release nutrients from that process. So they will also colonise around the root system. You really do need to look at times putting out some kind of a food source for trichodermas if you have low soil organic matter. So things like kelp, fish, humic acid, things like that. Okay, so their roles. So like I said before, they can switch between their mode of action. So in the soil, if you don't have any disease present in the soil, they'll produce what's called cellulase. Cellulase breaks down cellulose, which is the major makeup of organic matter. So they'll just slowly work on that, and they will start to unlock your nutrients. If there's disease present, either in the soil or if you're using them as part of a foliar program, like I said before, they produce chitinase. So they're producing that very strong substance to then break down the fungal cell wall. So they can switch what they do. The importance of the Caningii and Hasianum, like I said before, having them in the one product is actually critical. The Hasianum's major role is in the presence of a pathogen is to produce that chitinase. So that's its major role, is producing that chitinase, making those cell walls weak, for then the Caningii, which is a true parasitic trichoderma strain. It's one of the only true parasitic trichodermas. It's then easy for that to then get inside, like you saw the photos before, and actively feed off the pathogen from the inside out. So that's why having those two in the same product, they work hand in hand. Now this is some of the work that we did with Dr. Mary Cole on arthritis. At the moment, there's obviously a lot of talk that products have got to be registered. A lot of the wineries are saying that if you're going to use biological, it's got to be registered. The issue you have here is you cannot use those biologicals or any chemistry leading up to harvest if you have this issue, botrytis. Any of the other biologicals that are in the marketplace are only used as a preventative. Once you have an infection occur, you cannot use them. So this registration that the wineries are talking about, that you must use a product that's registered, this does nothing for you guys leading up to harvest if you have this issue, because guess what, you can't use it. You just can't use it. So it's not going to help you if you get botrytis infection leading up to harvest. So all the work we did with Dr. Mary Cole, we did all the standard botrytis sprays that you guys would do through the season. We had excellent results with that. But the best results we got was at the end of the season, when botrytis was there and we applied it. And the botrytis is the food source for the trichodermas. The trichodermas will be active within that bunch. If you have botrytis inside your bunch, which is often where it starts, by the time you see botrytis on the outside, it's too late. You've already got a lot of botrytis within that bunch. Any of your sprays that you put on a bunch cannot penetrate inside that bunch. It just sits on the outside. So you don't have activity within the bunch. If you have botrytis inside the bunch, the trichodermas will actively seek it out because it's their food source. They will penetrate the bunch. They will work within that bunch. So this here, that image there is from just down here. So when you apply trichodermas and they start to produce their mycelium, it starts out as white, and as you can see, you've got the white mycelium. If there's a lot of botrytis or other pathogens there, they go from yellow to green. So when they're sporulating or when they're having a frenzy, so they're just eating, they spread extremely quick, and that white powder turns from white to green. So if you use them out in the field and you see that white growth or yellow and green, it's actually okay. That's what you want them to actually do. So this was obviously a bunch treated and untreated. The trichodermas will actually dry up that ooze. It will actually clean it up. because that's its food source. Like the botrytis is eating the sugars that are present, the trichodermas will eat them. So as long as you've got active expressing botrytis in that bunch, your trichodermas will survive. Once there's no active botrytis, they will slowly die off. Now we've done all the work with the AWRI back in the day to make sure that these biologicals do not affect the winemaking process, and they don't. So we've done all of that work. Are these products registered to use on botrytis? No, they're not. Just like there's no product registered to use on botrytis. But these work better late in the season if you have it. We did have Tri-D25 in the dog book for, it was either Accolade or Treasury some years ago. I don't know if it is in there still. But they actually work extremely well. I'm almost done. This is a Grape. This was 11 replicated bunches that were harvested. The blue lines is the incidence of botrytis happening at that time. Now that was 32%. That's extremely high. They then took the bunches, they then increased the incidence of botrytis up to 52%. So again, much higher than what you're going to see out in the field. They applied Tri-D25, and within 48 hours, all these little lines here, it took it from averaging 53 to less than 1% in 2 days. So that's how aggressive these are. They work extremely fast in the presence of botrytis. Like I said earlier, all your earlier botrytis sprays through the season are critical. You have to do them. But if you get late rain and you get conditions that are conducive to botrytis late in the season, a lot of those early sprays aren't going to do much. Like I said, botrytis is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. So you've got that continually entering. If like growers want to look at using this for their standard sprays, that's fine. Most of the time, unless you're organic, we just say to growers, just do your standard chemistry sprays through the season. Keep those in place. Look at a product like this if you want late in the season when you have no other choice. If you want your grapes to be picked and you have some issues going on, it's up to you guys what you want to do. Just a really quick fun fact from the 80s, who didn't like her growing up. Did anyone here wear stone-washed jeans or acid-washed jeans? Surely, yeah, you're shaking your head, yeah, used to wear it. Anyone else here? Come on, I'm not the only old bastard in the room. Right back at you, Jock. So, actually, that's actually Jock there with his wife and kids just there in the corner. This is such a handsome man. So, I have some bad news for you guys. There's actually no such thing as stone-washed jeans, and stones were not used in the making of stone-washed jeans. You are actually lied to. They used trichoderma called Trichoderma reesii instead of using stones to give you that stone-washed look. So what they did, they put the jeans in a big vat of water, they put in the Trichoderma reesii, which produces cellulase, which breaks down cellulose, which is a major component of organic matter, which is also in cotton. And it's that process, that cellulase that was being produced, that gave you that acid-washed jeans. So they weren't made by stones or acid. Thanks for listening. Sorry it was quick and rushed. I had heaps to get through. Is there any time for any questions? Because I know there's other guys that have to talk.
A couple of questions, yeah, and then we'll race into Nick.
I'm going to be hanging around at the end, so
yeah,
if you have any questions.
We'll have time to give him up for questions if you like. So there's no burning questions at the moment. Cool.
No worries.
The thing that's coming out of the growers now, just make sure that you do consult the winery first up. Don't take it from us to say that it's permissible to use willy-nilly. it's a great product. It's there for its particular use, but do consult your winery before you put it out, because otherwise you might get bit in the butt if you do it and get found out. So, but yeah, so Dean's going to be here if you have a question during our morning tea, which we'll take after Nick is done. Just by all means hit him up. But so thanks to Nick Hall for coming out to do some updates for Syngenta.
No worries. Thanks everyone for your time today. Got a few products. Got a powdery product, got a downy product, got a vitrificide. I'll quickly cover those off a bit and have a chance to just chat about the diseases as well. So if you've got any questions, as we're talking about the powdery products, but any questions about anything powdery wise, please yell out. Moravus, so brand new product. So this was brand new last year, so this was released last year. So Syngenta, I think the spend's Australian dollars, I think it's 1.4 billion globally on R&D. We've been bringing about 1 new active a year. We're trying to get up to 2 new actives a year. So we've got new products, hopefully that can solve some problems that you guys might be facing in the field. This is one of the more recent ones. So anyone use Moravus last year? Yep. Okay, so powdery mildew. It's really powerful product against powdery. I'll show you some data. There's not really anything out there at the moment that you'll use that'll outperform it in how well it kills powdery mildew. Totally rain fast. Hopefully we do get a little bit of rain this year at some stage. It's not as dry as the Bureau's saying, but totally rain fast for now. Really long lasting protection. So 21 days. There's not too many powdery products out there that you're probably using and not worrying about getting the tractor out again up to 21 days control. There we go. So powdery. Powdery is an early season disease. If you're seeing powdery popping up late in the year, it's probably not so much that you took a little bit of extra time off over Christmas. It's more likely what you were doing before flowering. Okay, you see it late, it expresses late, but it's a disease that establishes early. So right from bud burst, you don't see much, and if you're around Christmas time is when you generally see it, but it's this piece here that allows the disease to slowly really crank up over time. So the first 40 days is what you need to be really on top of the powdery control. So if you've got Chardonnay bursting, you can wait for the Cabernet to come out. I'm not going to get the tractor out there to spray the Cabernet, the Chardonnay for sulphur. I'll wait. It's actually a really bad move with powdery. You're letting it get established early. Every little bit you get it established early, it's going to kick you in the butt late. So if you're umming and erring over whether to spray something for powdery early, do it. Go early. It'll pay you in spades later on. So the idea of putting on some of the best chemistries you've got is so that it doesn't get away here. If you put your early sulphur sprays on and then go into a big gun product, you're keeping it low and it stays low. You can keep it really low over the season by doing the heavy lifting through this first 40 days. So we've got a few products that you might be using for powdering. So Thivit, one that you probably know, our sulphur product. Topaz, which you might have been using over the years around a flowering time. Amistad with a few different diseases. I'll talk a bit about that later. But this new one, Moravus. So I'll talk about it today. Its fit is just prior to flowering. I say that really early on you need to get a sulphur on. One of the things that comes up, I guess, with powdery and people wanting to put off that first sulphur spray is today it's a bit cold. Sulphur work when it's cold. Yes, sulphur works very well when it's cold. Most of the effect you get from sulphur is by contact. So you need good coverage when it's cold. You can get away with it a little bit with some fuming later on when it warms up. So you need contact and you get really good control of powdery with sulphur. How easy is it to get good coverage early? It's pretty easy. So it doesn't really matter, you're not fuming early, it's a benefit you get later on when your canopies get a little bit bigger. So Moravus, what does this product look like when you use it? So this is some stuff we do. This is for registration, so you've got to put this is 5 applications in a row, which you're not allowed to do, you're allowed to do 2. But to get some data, we put on a block of sprays and we do nothing else for the season. We see how much powder we get at the end of the year. This is 54 days after the 4th application. Versus untreated, had a lot of powdery incidence and severity. topaz, yeah, look, it's starting to get away. Talando, flute, you know, top end products, like 40 something bucks a hectare, 30 bucks a hectare, you know, low teens a hectare. Marabas, doing a beautiful job, even 54 days. So can we be confident that you get up to 21 days control? Yes, we can. We know this product gives us really good, high level and quite long control. And I said that's, you know, that's 40 something, that's probably around 30, that's low teens. You'd reckon this one would be, you know, 40 bucks, something like that. And if you buy it in 20 litre containers, depending on your canopy size before flaring, it's probably 16 bucks a hectare. Luckily, it's also registered in canola, which as the volume's up, they use big chunks of product, which is get the price down, which is great for a brand new product. And something that works at such a high level. That timing, so if you're putting it on just before flowering, so you can actually do a bit of a change this year. This year you can do back-to-back applications, which is the best way to use it. Last year you had to put something in the middle. This year you don't have to put something in the middle. 2 Maravises in a row, up to 21 days apart. The only thing with that is for resistance management, put a 200 grams of sulphur to 100 into one of them. So chuck some sulphur in one spray, go back to back. If you're going in, so the cut-off is EL 19 or 18 if you're Pinot Ricard, so just prior to flowering. If you're going to use a product, you do one at about 17, say. Come back 21 days, that's when you do your first one. Fits in where a lot of people have been using Prosper type programs, so Sulphur and Prosper, Myclos was this program, and this one's looking at Sulphur and Moralis coming in with topaz over flowering. So it works very well. That versus just Prosper alone, so this is just Moralis versus just Prosper. That's using them in a program. Untreated, nearly 100% incidence and 20% severity, so quite bad to powder. This one was done in SA, I think this was done at Langhorne. So you might be thinking 21 days, am I really is it going to last 21 days? So this is another block of 4 sprays, nothing else afterwards. We kept waiting with this one, so we waited for 96 days. Other products, these are good products. After 96 days, they're not working. Okay, well that's okay, it's 96 days. Moralis works at such a high level and stores inside the plant, doesn't wash off. Can you get 21 days control of this product? 21 days? Yes. Okay, so hopefully looking at these things, you can be confident that you can you know, be going up to 21 days. So if you're going 2 sprays at 21 days before flowering, you've actually got some time to put the boat in the water and you know, you're probably dropping that spray around. So you're going to have to think about what you're going to do in that time you will be going out and spraying, because spray, 21 days spray, 21 days before your next spray, I mean you've dropped out 1 full spray round. And you have to spend a bit of money on the boat because you just saved putting your tractor around for another spray, as well as the fact that this stuff doesn't actually cost any more than a Prosper. It costs about the same as a Prosper, costs less than a Talando or a Flute or a Wasabi, all those sort of things. So it's actually a product that works at an extremely high level, and thanks to canola growers, because they use big you know, bucket loads of stuff covering the broad acres they do, it's at a really good price. So how dangerous is this stuff to people? It's not actually a scheduled poison. Still wear your standard stuff. You're going to put something for downing in the tank and you need to wear your safety gear, but it's not a scheduled poison. So quite a safe product to be adding in. So what is it? Powdery control, totally rain fast, very high level of control, powdery mildew up to that 21 days protection. One of the problems with up to 21 days is you probably want to control some downing in there as well. 21 days. Not too much of a problem, because luckily one of the other products we've had, this one's been around for a little bit longer, is Rebus. Anyone used Rebus in the past for downing mildew control? A couple of knots, no hands, a couple of knots. 2 rates on Rebus, on the Rebus load, if you have a look. One for up to 14 days control, a little bit higher rate for up to 21 days control. So this is another product that's totally rain fast. Okay, you put it on the top, locks in. Not only does it lock in, but it's translaminar, so it moves down to the bottom surface of the leaf. Why is the bottom surface of the leaf important for downing mildew control? So where the stomata are, and that's where downy infects, right on the bottom. So if you put a downy spray out, you don't get coverage on the bottom of the leaf, your downy is going to grow quite nicely because the product's on the top and it'll go on the stomata at the bottom. So it covers that bottom surface, so really good for downy control and grape vines. It's inside the leaves, so it can't wash off. So if you look at Moravas and Reeves, two products, Reeves at the 60ml rate, both controlled in 21 days, both can't wash off. So Moravas showed you some data, really high level of control. How good's the level of control for Reeves? So this is Reeves at the lower rate, so giving you 14 days control. This is looking at 14 days, comparing to these products, also looking at 14 days. Okay, so untreated, yeah, downy's bad when you get the conditions. It's very aggressive disease. Diethane, coppers and mancozebs do a bit. Cabrio gives you downy control. Acrobat. Reeves work very well. VitiBucks, actually used as a preventative. It's actually the best preventative you can get. Pretty expensive, so most people hold on to it until they know it's going to rain. It's just rained, and they look at putting it on. Put on before rain. It's a fantastic preventative product. So Reeves this is at 21 days. So at 40 mils, that's under. So this is the rate for 14 days. But at 60 mils, 21 days, really good control. Really high level of control. 60 mils, 21 days. So you've got two options there. Two, you can chuck in a tank, 21 days control. This one can be used a little bit later. This one can be used a little bit later. 19's the cut-off. You've got until the end of flowering with Reeves, so you can use it a little bit later. Actually, who's ever had downy mildew ever? Who's had downy? Yep. Who's had downy when you didn't think you had 10, 10, 24? Yeah. Okay. So you've probably noticed, right? 10, 10, 24. Really nice ring to it. Probably not totally surprising that the disease didn't actually happen to fall on 10 and 24 as the triggers for it. It's sort of close-ish, but it's not exact, right? The numbers didn't happen to be that round. So, do you need 10 mils of rain? We'll start with the temperature. Do you need 10 degrees? It's pretty close. It's actually high 8s, 8.7 or something you can get it down to. Do you need 10 mils of rain? Well, two things you need rain for with downy. You need some rain to wet the soil to get some sporulation, and you need some splash to get it up. So if you're starting out with a really dry soil, it could be about 10 mils. Some rain to wet the soil for 16 hours or something, and wet soil, and then some splash to get it up. So that might be 10 mils of rain. Who here irrigates? Yeah. What does that do to the soil? Wets it. So if you happen to have irrigated before a rainfall event, and if you drip irrigation, sometimes a bit of soil's damp a lot of the time, your 16 hours of soil wetness that you needed to get sporulation, you've done that with irrigation. So you got 8.7 degrees or more, you had irrigated, so you've got sporulation. How much rain do you actually need? Just enough to splash some of those spores up to the canopy. You know, that time of year, spring rain, bit of a dump, 2 mils of rain, some big droplets can give you some splash, right? That's enough. It's just some splash because you've got spores, because your soil was wet already. So, you know, okay, so 10, 10, 24, it could be 8.7, it could be 2 or 3 or 4 mils of rain. 24 degrees, so most of that, 24 hours, so most of that 24 hours is about getting the spores from the soil. You need wet soil for 16 hours. You've irrigated, so we'll throw that 16 hours away because you've irrigated. You had some splash, so for the spore that's just splashed and is now on the leaf, how long does that need to be wet? That's temperature related. The warmer it is, the quicker that happens. So you need about 48 degree day units. Okay, so if it's 24 degrees, it takes 2 hours. Okay, it could take, if it was really cold, if it was down to close to 8, it might take 6 or 8 hours. It's really cold, but it's a bit warmer. At 24, it's 2 hours. So it could be 8.7 to 2. So wondering why you had downy when you didn't have 10, 10, 24? Because 10, 10, 24 was nice and convenient and round, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. So Reeves, 8.7 as that minimum sort of temperature. So sometimes if people are doing 2 Moravises, they might decide the first one they'll just still possibly going to be a bit cold over temperatures that time of year. So sometimes people go, oh, I'm going to do 2 Miravises. I might do my first one with a copper or Maker's Ebb. I might do my second one with a Rebus. Give me 21 days over flowering with powdery and downy. That's my 2 Miravises done. I might put my second Rebus on towards the end of flowering, to cover me just past flowering. Powdery is critical early. Downy, once it's warmed up, it becomes a bit more critical. That's how you might time, a Miravis Rebus spray. Questions on powdery? So we talked about.
What's the rate on Rebus and what's it vary from?
So 40 per 100 is your low rate, 60 mils per 100 is your high rate. So per 100, so we're talking around flowering. What's a dilute spray for you at flowering or just prior to flowering? How big is your canopy? 700? Yep. So if you go on the high rate, 60 times 7. Who's good at maths?
420.
There you go. I haven't had enough coffee to do maths lately. I'm about to get away yet. So that's how. So and Miravis 20 mils. So you'd be what 150 or 60 or something.
Size packages they only.
Rebus in 5s, Miravis in 1s, 5s and 20s. 20s is a bit more aimed at the canola end, canola boys. So you do. So basically, if you needed a 5 of Miravis, and you're doing the higher rate of Rebus, 20 mils and 60 mils, you do 3 of Rebus and 1 of Miravis to do 30 excess. So powdery, so sulphur, we spoke about the fact that it works when it's cold. Spoke about the fact that you've got to go earlier rather than later because powdery, once it gets away, keeps you in the bud at Christmas time. Probably the other thing we sometimes get later on with sulphur is burn and temperature. So burns, it's actually, you've got to get inside the leaf, so it forms acid inside the leaf that gets there. To do that, stomata got to be wide open. The stomata to be wide open, it's actually more humidity related than temperature. So if you're in the Riverland and it's 42 degrees and you ring me up and you go, Nick, it's really hot, can I spray my thigh but still? Now what's the humidity? What's the Riverland? It's 4. Spray away. You don't get in there, those stomata close up so tight, nothing's getting in there. You're down here, and you've got a bit of humidity coming in. It's 32 degrees. Nick, can I spray 5 it? What's the humidity? 60%. Ooh, you need to just be a little bit careful. So once you're above 50%, which isn't that often here, luckily, once you're above 50% and sort of 32 degrees, you got to be a little bit careful. When it's hotter down here, it's because the breeze is coming off the land and it's very low humidity, and if your humidity is low and it's in the 30s, your humidity is 40, 30, 20%, you go. So if you're worried about burn and sulphur, look at humidity more than you look at temperature. Volume Targo. So anyone got mites like rust mite? Yeah, okay, so a little bit. So this is a new product. We've finally got something other than sulphur registered for mites in wine grapes. So this is actually, look, it's predominantly an apple moth product. So an apple moth spray, putting out a spray for apple moth. But if you have trouble with rust mite, then this is probably the right apple moth spray for you to be considering, because it does both. Again, rainfast an hour. If you don't have, it's a couple of bucks, it's a few bucks hectare more than something like Proclaim. So if you're not worried about mites, you'd probably look at something more like Proclaim. But if you want mites, or if you've got garden weevil, this is suppression on garden weevil. Not quite as good as Avatar, but that's the only other product that does it. So if you're spraying for garden weevil, it's a good rotational option. So yeah, it does a few more than the straight apple moth and grapevine moth that most of your apple moth sprays do. Proclaim Opti, last year was Proclaim, this year Proclaim Opti. What's the difference? We've modernised the formulation, it's been around for a few years, so we'll just put a few better adjuvants and bits and pieces in the same rate, same result, you won't notice any major changes. But it is a couple of bucks hectare less, so if you're just after apple moth, something like this, so Proclaim Opti does all feeding sizes of grubs. If they're eggs and they're eating out, it'll kill them. Does all feeding sizes of grubs. So some of the apple moth sprays only kill certain sizes. This one will kill them from eating out right through to stopping eating. So this one, also very strong on apple moth, but a few bucks extra if you're worried about mites, and have a chat to the guys about using some volume target this year.
What's it like on beneficials?
So stuff that you spray, that you're actually spraying, yeah, look, it can do some beneficials and some mites as well, some beneficial mites. But you know, it's not staying on the leaf surface, so stuff that's out and feeding at the time, you can do it. You certainly can hit a few up. But stuff that's coming in afterwards, no, because it's not staying on the leaf surface. The other one, Proclaim Opti, is actually pretty good IPM wise. That's gone very quickly from the leaf surface in the sun, breaks very quickly in the sunlight. So I think, you know, ladybirds and lots of stuff is extremely, lacewing and most are extremely low. That's probably a little bit, it's probably, if you were just doing apple moth, stay with that one. If you're looking at volume target, it is far friendlier than something like Avatar. So if you're using Avatar because you've got some garden weevil as well, that's the other end of the spectrum. That's quite hard on your predators. Volume target, no, not so bad. Two reasons. If your garden weevil's not so bad, people are preferring volume target because it's better on predators. If you've got a really high level and you're spraying it regularly, well, then people are rotating. Avatar does get a slightly higher level of control, but it's harder on the predators. And rust mite, see the only other thing we've got sulphur, that does a really good job on rust mite. What are you seeing? So if you've got rust mite, this is what you see. You can control them. Keep that green tissue on, get the carbohydrate going back into the vine at the end of the year instead of into the mites. And garden weevil, as I said, not quite as good as Avatar, but it has a better IPM profile. And again, there's nothing much else that does garden weevil, I don't think. Botrytis. So we've sort of spoken about downy, we've spoken about powdery. We've got a little bit of time, I think, don't I? Not too bad. So botrytis. So we got a few botryticide products. Two of them, Amistar and Switch. Now Switch probably comes more to mind. I mean, it's been the big gun in botrytis control for quite a while. Two active ingredients. One basically over 4 different areas that it controls in those 2 active ingredients, right from early spore germination through to trying to put pegs out infection later on. So controls a really nice range, very high level of control for Switch. But Amistar is one. Amistar is actually, it's pretty good botryticide. And I guess when it first came out, it was horribly dear, which is probably why it hasn't been in a lot of programs. It's actually not the case anymore. Might be, I don't know, $40 a hectare or something. For a botryticide is pretty good. For a botryticide that's an excellent downy mildew product as well. So $40, it's almost priced as a downy product, but it's a very good botryticide as well. So here's Switch. So Switch is controlling the fludeoxonil and sopronil. It's one of the few, or the only botrytis active I think that's not having resistance commonly found around the place. Resistance is an issue, so we need to make sure we look at resistance management. But yeah, it's controlling right across all these stages of growth and disease development. Botryticides, put them on before the rain. If you've got a botryticide scheduled in somewhere and there's some rain coming before you're going to spray that on, bring it forward, put it on. Because this doesn't go out to here when the botrytis is really bad. So do put them on before the rain. Not just because you've got to schedule it in at late flowering. Don't put on late flowering, it's going to rain in the middle of flowering. Put on the start. They work much better, or they work when you put them on before a rain. So how well does it work? So these 2 actives, by stacking them together with Switch, it's really bumping that level of control up. Okay, so very high level of control. Basically, if there's bad weather coming, it tends to be to go to when people are really looking for something for a high level of control. But when it's not really bad weather and you're not looking for the highest level of control, you just want something that's not going to break the paint. So, if you're either umming and ahhing on whether you put a metricide in the program, or you're thinking about whether you need 2 in the program, but the cost of 2 big guns is scary, which it can be, they're pretty expensive. You can look at using either just Amostar if the conditions aren't too bad, or Amostar and switch in a program. So when would you put which one out? So flowering, and then obviously the latest you can put on these sort of products is out around like sort of 29 for both of them. So you've got flowering, early flowering, and then just prior to 20, and around 29 as your cut-off. Which one do you put first? So if at flowering time, you know, weather's not too bad, it's not wet, it's not windy, it's pretty nice flowering, but you want something on in case some weather comes, low pressure, that might be the time you put an Amostar on. However, if you've got these 2 products in your program and it's going to be blowing a gale and rain at flowering, because those flowers coming off, those cap scars on the berries, you know, it's a lazy disease, it needs an infection site. Flowering is a critical time that you can get a lot of latent infection. So, whilst you don't see it until it sugars up late, that infection happens with bad weather at flowering. So, you know, and switch is, you know, the big gun if the weather goes bad. So if your weather's going to be bad at flowering, put your switch on at flowering, hold your Amostar for a bit later on to give you something later to put on. They both move in. They're not sitting on the outside. They're both storing inside, you know, storing inside tissue. So you can put an Amostar on late to give you that little bit of late control if the weather's bad at flowering. Good weather at flowering, and you still want to put something under cover, save some money. Use your Amostar. How good is it? So switch tends to be the big gun that people turn to when weather's bad, but it's still a very good option. Ideally, early mid flowering if you're going to do it around flowering time. Or use something else at flowering if the weather's bad, use it just before you cut off.
So you say it's in the plant, it's systemic, so when you put it on the birds and you say, how long you cover the rest of the flowering?
So in systemic, so these products, to me, systemic's a bit overused in our industry, so they're translaminar, a little bit apical, so they go into the tissue and they move a little bit up and out, but they don't go out of that and into something else. So to me, systemic is, you know, it's going to go down the roots, down the leaves. None of the tricycles do that. So, but yes, it's not just sitting on the outside, it's moving in through the leaf and out a little bit. So, I mean, through flowering, yeah, absolutely, it's covering that critical time.
7 days.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you're putting these things on before disease. Putting them on before disease is much easier for them to control disease. Once you've got a little bit of disease there, you know, it certainly reduces the length of control that you get. But yet, put it on prior to infection, put it on the start of flowering, to cover that flowering period. Once you get outside of that flowering period and those wounds have healed up, you're actually outside of. You don't need it to last a lot longer than that, because then it's not going to be a problem until stuff sugars up later on in the season.
So if you kept them clean during flowering, why would you need your 329?
So that's your last chance to put a big gun chemistry on. After that, you're down to some of the other late products.
You think you control it with flowering?
Yep. So 2 times that you can get infection. So later, once it sugars up, if you get apple moth or wind damage or berry splitting, you're then open for infection again.
You can't be season.
No. So the last time you can do is 29, which is why people will often say, "Oh, I'll put that switch on at 29." It's the last time I've got to put a big gun for control on it. Or if I get some rain after that, it's my last chance to get something else on.
You'd have to have really bad weather to be worthwhile putting that weight on, I think. If you control it properly, if you put one on mid to early to mid flowering, and you reckon you've covered the flowering with a translaminar product,
Yep.
you'd have to have pretty crappy conditions.
No, so by the time you get, so if you're putting it on 29, the idea is it'll control, you get a bit. So once you go, a week past 29, the stuff you do at flowering, that's definitely gone. So if you then get a split or an apple moth chew or whatever, some damage, and botrytis starting, it's about controlling that infection up that end. So, the reason you still need to look at flowering is if you don't do that, and you get to late in the season and, you know, you can do whatever you want then, but if it's already going, it's inside, you'll get detritus. So that's the two windows you're trying to cover. And this is a way, the Amistar is a way to keep those costs right down. Instead of putting on 2 sprays that are, you know, $100, different sprays, you can pull out one that's $40. And it's actually really, it's downy product, and again it gets in so it doesn't wash off. So it's a really good downy protectant, but it's also giving you that pretty good detritus protection as well. We'll schedule it for the last one, because that's your last chance to put something on, and then you're on to the biorationals and those other products. But if you're going to have bad weather early, and you're going to put the triticide out, you know you're going to have bad weather, that's the time to use a switch. You know, use your biggest product when you know you're going to have bad weather. That's the one you want to control mainly. Best for triticide is the one you put on right before a rain. So the other thing happening, so we're sometime this year we've got a biorational coming. So biorational a little bit different. So it's not a bacteria living. It's a botanical extract. So it's a tea tree oil extract is where it came from. We're hoping to be basically a middle withhold, and that product. So it works as a cell disruptor. So if you get powdery orbitritis on the surface, it disrupts the cells, kills the cells. So we're hoping for that to be registered by the time you might be using late season control machines. Okay, so a little bit different to the other ones. Not a living, you know, not made by bacteria or any bacteria. It's a botanical extract. So yeah, watch out for that one a little bit later this season. So yeah, as you see, Amistar holds up very well. It's been probably underestimated, I guess, in detritus control, especially considering the price now. As I said, bad weather at flowering, quick switch on, hold the Amistar up the sleeve. Good weather at flowering, maybe put your Amistar and then only switch until later on. The other thing is people sometimes go, I'm going to use one decent detriticide, I'm going to go to the big gun and have switch because that's the one I open and along when it rains. So what's the program? Okay, I want to switch, so I'll do a switch. Just one this year. What's the program next year? Just one switch. Okay, so resistance management goes from season to season. So resistance management is not using the same product. Detriticide, you need to rotate, right? Detriticide. That's even across years. So if you're just doing one spray, you need to do something else in there. So what we're doing by adding a cheaper detriticide in is you're increasing the opportunity to use switch a little more. Can't just go switch this year, switch the following year, switch the year after that. You'll bust it. Any other questions about detritus, powdery, downy? All good. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And you'll be around for
Yeah, I'll hang around for a
if
bit.
anyone wants to hit him up for some questions, feel free to do so. We'll probably take a break now for 20 minutes, grab some morning tea and a cuppa, and then we'll have James Stacey after that to present as well. So yeah, just take a break. And yeah, bathrooms at the back too. It's really good morning tea. It's probably the best I've had. So and yeah, so James will just take us through the Nuffield scholarship, his time experience with it. So it's not so video related, but more broad agricultural stuff. So should be pretty interesting to listen to. So thanks, James.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks, everyone. Hope I'm as interesting as the past speakers and the next ones. Most of you guys know that I did a Nuffield scholarship last year. My topic, as a Nuffield scholar, you have to come up with a topic that you want to look at in your travels, and I chose to look at the impact of urban growth on agriculture and what impact that was having on us. But the process of a Nuffield scholarship is, it goes through a number of stages. So this photo here, we're in Holland, and this is at the start of the Nuffield process. So this is the Contemporary Scholars Conference, which was in the Netherlands. So all the Nuffield scholars from around the world meet up there. There's Nuffield was started in the 1950s by William Morris, who became Lord Nuffield. William Morris built Morris Minor Cars, and was a wealthy industrialist in the UK. And the end of World War II, English agriculture decided that they needed to work out how they're going to feed themselves better and send farmers around the world and bring back ideas and technology back to the UK. So that's how the whole process started. So there's been about 1,800 Nuffield scholars to this point. So last year, in the year that I did it, there was 84. So there was scholars from Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, the US, the UK, Ireland, Denmark, and France. And then there's Nuffield International, so anyone from around the world can apply to do a Nuffield International Scholarship. So this Contemporary Scholars Conference in the Netherlands was for 2 weeks, and we learned a lot about European agriculture and history. And it also, Nuffield's about leadership development, so you did some personality profiling and that kind of stuff, and learnt more about yourself, which was quite interesting. Then I came home, and then as part of the scholarship, the Australian scholars have to do what's called a global focus program, and there's 6 different options of where you can go. There's and I chose to do the China focused module. So there was seven of us that went on it. There was 4 Aussies, a lad from Kununurra who grows cotton up there, a lad from Julia Creek, a beef farmer, a grain grower from northern part of Western Australia, north of Perth, a nutritionist, the lady there from the UK, pig nutritionist, a vet from Ireland, and a Brazilian fish farmer, Mauro Nakata. And we got the list of names, and I said, that doesn't look very Brazilian. He's 3rd generation Japanese Brazilian, so he's got quite a big tilapia freshwater fish production facility in the UK, in Brazil. So these pictures here, I've got a few more, but this picture here is at Beeswax Farm in the UK. That's the farm owned by James Dyson, the vacuum cleaner guy. He's got about 35,000 acres of cropping country in the UK. And the property quite close to that was a 3 megawatt electricity generating biodigester, which took 1,200 acres of crop from around it into the biodigester to generate power. Like, it's just crazy. Picture down the bottom's in a wheat field in China that was about to be sown with corn. Like, it was amazing. In the region, we're in the Yellow River channels go into the region, and they pump the water out of that to pump onto the wheat crop in winter time. And then there's bores when they sow corn in the summer. The drain or the conveyancing drain to get the water there from the Yellow River in winter was actually used to drain the summer runoff off the paddocks because it gets so wet. So that was really interesting. And then up the top we're in Olam in China, which I'll make more references to. So the GFP, we started in Singapore, and then we went to, that's an International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, which everyone was out there sowing stuff, but I wasn't, because I cut my toe off 2 weeks before I went, so I wasn't getting in that. The area has been operating since the 1960s. It was where the sort of green revolution of increasing rice production in the developing world happened. There's trial plots there that have been going since the 1960s, which was really awesome, like zero phosphorus trial plots, just seeing how rice production had been operating in there and the technology that they were using. But the crazy thing about this is, like, out from the facility was a road, which used to be a quiet road. Samsung's now building a telephone, like, electronics factory. This farm can't get workers because the workers are going to work in the technology factory. So getting labour in agriculture isn't just a problem in the developed world by miles. So GFP, 6.5 weeks, 6 countries, so there's plenty of food and drinking. So that was a restaurant in rural China. The lad over here, Paul Nevin, he's a Nuffield scholar. He ran VDL Van Diemen's Land Dairy in Tasmania, the big dairy farm that's been sold to the Chinese now. He runs 2 4,000 cow dairies for Fonterra in China, and it was the best dairy setup I've seen anywhere in the world. Like, the they'd spent $60 million building these dairy facilities. It was awesome. They had biodigesters to chew up the manure at the end and generate their own power. It was really cool. But this restaurant, we walked in and it's like just pavers on the ground, there's rats running around, and your scraps you throw them under the table and they just hose it off. So she was pretty rural, and the chicken shop down the road was the chicken shop, live chooks and chop heads off and away you go. So. And Maro went to the loo and he came back shaking his head because he'd just seen a mum holding her child over the basin, relieving himself, the hand basin. So, so it's interesting. So we went from China to Germany, and then the UK, and then Washington, and then the final destination for our GFP was Iowa. So we were in Iowa last July. They'd just had 8 inches of rain, I think. Iowa was just like, the soil was like chocolate. It's amazing. And like this cornfield here is a hybrid hybrid corn program. So obviously a lot of the technology is GM, but a lot of the plants are hybridised as well. So, and the opportunity in Iowa to go to the Monsanto seed technology factory was amazing, to see them like taking slivers off seeds and gene testing them to work out what was going on. Was super interesting, and was one of the most interesting bits was we were behind glass, because the lady that took us around said they'd had a Chinese delegation there a number of years before, and they were pocketing seeds out of different places as they were walking around the facility. So you can see why Donald has his views on what's going on with the Chinese. But yeah, like the whole Iowa just looks like the whole place is irrigated. Like they have 2 metres of rain. The soil is like black, beautiful soil, but it's just corn and soybeans. Like just you drive and it's just corn and soy. Some of the hilly country there's lucerne that they'll grow some cattle on, but it's just mainly that. And 80% of the corn from Iowa gets used for animal production. Like hardly any of it really gets used for human consumption. Like it's for animals and for generating ethanol as well. And you're there and you go to a beef feedlot and the guy's getting $50 a tonne distillers grain to feed his feedlot beef cattle, and you go, fuck, like, we're not making any money in Australia doing that. Like, 'cause they're making some serious dough. So I'll just quickly touch on my topic, which I've done the main report on. When I initially left, my idea was to look at the challenge and opportunity for agriculture in peri-urban areas like almost where we are in Mount Barker. It's purely driven from what I've seen happen with Mount Barker and planning laws and the debacle that's been. So I went around like on the GFP before I did my personal travel to look at my own topic, and I sort of figured out anyone can make money close to an urban centre, but there's reasons why that stops happening, and the reason it stops happening is because planning rules change, land's rezoned, and then the cost of like rates and taxes become prohibitive, so you can't operate there anymore. So I wanted to have a look in a few places where it's been done well, like restrictions on land use has been done well, and where it's been done badly. And in places like in China, they've actually got a retention rule that they want to retain 85% of their farmland. And when you're driving around China, in rural China, you see lots of green shade cloth, and it's over rubble. So what they're doing is they build, and people look at China and go, why do they build cities and not in them? They actually are smarter than what we are. They actually build the city, and then they move the country people to own. A village in China might own about 350 acres around the village, and they all own a couple of acres each. So they'll get paid for their bit of land where their houses are on, and get like high-rise apartments built for them, which they then shift into, and then they flatten the village and turn it back into farmland. So they're still retaining a higher level of agricultural productive land by forcing people up, and then returning that land back to agriculture, which from a social point of view is probably going to cause them problems down the track. And from a contamination point of view, like if you've got industrial land that's now become gone back into agriculture. That's a bit iffy, but like you're walking around in the fields in China and there's bits of red bricks and tiles, and you don't know, they could be 500 years old, you don't know. So it is amazing the transformation of the country, but the history is basically being bulldozed as well. So the only place you see like Great Wall and Beijing, you still see old buildings, but in a lot of China, it's got all the stuff's been constructed in the last 20 or 30 years, and everything else has been flattened. And in places like British Columbia, around Vancouver, they've had planning laws in place since 1976 that restrict urban sprawl onto farmland, and they've held that firm. So all the hills, they've got houses on it, and all the flat ground, the flat farm ground is worth about 100 grand an acre. It's highly productive, but it's still being maintained in agriculture because the laws are that tight that they can't develop it. And then Oregon, every city has to have a plan. There's 100 towns and cities, and they have to have a plan for growth. So if they want to grow, they have to put that forward to the state government, and then the local university looks at it, and they'll select the land that's least valuable for agriculture, and that's the land that can be developed on next. So they really slow the process. And the frustrating thing of what's happening in Australia is, like, obviously in South Australia we've got the McLaren Vale and Barossa Valley protected zones. We've now got the Adelaide, the agricultural zones protected sort of in this region, but legislation is only as good as what the review process is, and if the review process can be corrupted by developers with money and politicians, that's when it starts to become a problem. And you go over to Victoria and you've got green wedge around Melbourne, and that's been nibbled away at, and the developers all do the same trick. And what happened in McLaren Vale with the guy that wants to build the nursing homes, he bought a vineyard over there, then ripped it out and said it's not viable, and then claims he wants to be able to develop it with buildings on it. So it's really interesting to see where there's tight legislation. The developers, I was talking to the government people in Canada, and they said it took 20 years for some of the developers to give up after the rules changed and sell it back into agriculture, because they just were lobbying the local politicians hard so they could keep developing it. But the frustrating thing of what's happening in Australia now is Melbourne and Sydney just going gangbusters out, but then we watched Four Corners last night, and we should be building up, but now the shonky guys are building crap buildings up, so people want to go out again. So you can't win. So, but it's just like really interesting. In another place, Boise in Idaho. Idaho's sort of about 1,000 k's from the coast, from San Francisco. You drive over the Rockies over the top. It's about 350,000 acres of flood irrigation comes from snowmelt dams into the region. There's Boise's on the edge of it, so where it goes back into the hill country, and the developers are just going gangbusters on the flat irrigation country. They grow a lot of seed, lucerne, seed carrots and potatoes and things like that there, so it's really high value agriculture, but the land's just getting chewed up. Like Meridian, a town near Boise's gone from 10,000 people to 100,000 people in 10 years. And they, out of the 350,000 acres of croppable land, they reckon by 2,100, half of that would be have houses on it. And it's like, in the Australian context or the US context, food security to us doesn't seem that important. But if you eat it up over time, eventually it's going to get right on the backside. So this is just some observations of mine from my travels. When I went away, it was sort of June, so the trade war was only just starting to kick off. So US trade war was just starting to fire up, and it's a huge issue. Western consumers shifting to more sustainable production is what people say they want, but at the same time they're pushing back against GM, CRISPR technology, like the glyphosate issue in the US just keeps getting bigger and bigger, which is a problem for agriculture. Brexit in the UK, like the UK just walking off a cliff. Like they just don't seem to be. Like, the UK farmers are quite strange, and because the UK and European agriculture, their subsidies that they still get are based on a per hectare basis. So it's about €220 a hectare they're getting and that's just for a cropping operation. So it's about $450 a hectare that's straight in their pocket. So the farmers who have got broadacre farms, well, that's good because they get paid more. They've got lots of hectares, so they just keep growing cereal crops, even though they're pretty, they can grow big crops, but they've got high cost to do it. But they don't go and grow vegetables because that's on a smaller area, and they're harvesting money. I had the opportunity to go on an estate. It was 3,000 acres. The family had it for 200 years, and young lad, he was taking it on from dad, and he was telling us how he was really down in the dumps because he'd had to borrow some money, and he wanted to buy some more land, and we said, well, how much have you borrowed? And he goes, I've borrowed £6 million, and that's 5%, you've still got 95% equity. And he was really worried about this, and I said, mate, just if you want more land, just go buy it, because you've got plenty of equity to do what you're doing. But like this estate, he had 100 houses on it that he was renting out, but they've got some really bizarre arrangements that people who've been there forever, they get it at like almost a peppercorn rental, so he wasn't making money out of half of his rentals, and the other half he's making money out of, and it's like he had the cravat, he had everything. He was an entertainer. He should have just had people there, and he had like a deer. He had about 500 acres of deer running around in his paddocks and stuff. And it's quite a unique experience to go and do that. And then the next one is animal welfare and the reduction in antibiotic use. In Europe, they're really pulling back on antibiotic use in animal production because they're all spooked about the antibiotic resistance in humans becoming a problem. But that's a really interesting point, because when we were in Hong Kong, we went to the Hong Kong vet school, which I don't know why you have a vet school in Hong Kong, but then you realise how many people there is and how many dogs and cats people have in their own apartments. And it was a really interesting discussion, because the head of the vet school said the biggest risk to human impact of the antibiotic use is in animals that live close to humans. And in Hong Kong, you can buy antibiotics quite easily. So a lot of the animals will be having antibiotics, then shedding spores in the environment, and then the humans are in contact with that. So humans are actually probably more in danger from their own pets than they are from farm animal production. But that's just something we as farmers get blamed as being a problem, but it's not. And then nitrate runoff. Like here, obviously, we know it doesn't rain enough, so it doesn't run off. The Great Barrier Reef, that cane farmers are impacted up there. But until you actually go to Europe or the US, where they're actually taking drinking water from areas close to, or runoff from farms, you don't realise how big the problem is. And when we're in Iowa, we said to some farmers, is there any nitrate issues here? Because they've got their hydrogenous ammonia going out, and they've 2 metres of rainfall, mould drains draining the water back straight into the rivers, and they said they didn't have a problem. But then you go to the university and they go, the Des Moines water, that's the main city, took the farmers to court for high nitrate levels in the water, but the farmers won, so they don't think they've got a problem. It is a massive issue, like not here but around the world. It's just something that's going to get bigger and bigger. Like New Zealand farmers are finding problems with it down in the South Island. They've got huge issues, and it's going to really pull back on the ability of agriculture to grow as much food and fibre as what it is, because if you have to use less nitrogen in a high rainfall environment, it's going to change things. But the next speaker might be able to sort something out on that one. So that's sustainability issues, the nitrate runoff. Carbon dioxide emissions, obviously, there's a lot of money being spent at the moment, especially Australia's probably leading the way in terms of how we feed our livestock. If we can feed them, like there's talk of the seaweed additives that are reducing the carbon dioxide or the methane emissions from cows, and feedlots and dairy operators will be able to start to manage that in a pretty big way. So that's something that's getting bigger. Use of water resources. I went to Louisiana at the end of the Mississippi and went to a guy who sold pivots and put wells down and things like that. and like the Mississippi River's up high, and there's a big delta that comes down, and the farmers have just got wells there. It was the end of a dry summer, and they're all complaining of running out of water, so they put more lengths on and put it down a bit further or drill more holes. Like the water management is just non-existent in the US, and it's quite frightening. Like, yes, it's wet, but they are aware there's problems. Like the New Orleans can't get their water out of the Mississippi for drinking water. They have to get it further out, Baton Rouge, which is about 100 k's further up the river. So I think the Mississippi's have got about 150 miles of river that you can't get drinking water from. So it's similar to what we've got, our problems down here, but they're just not even attempting to tackle it. And then you go, I went from California, I went up through the Central Valley in California, and there's all these signs saying build more dams. So it's like the Queenslanders and New South Wales people. And yet there's signs that say build more dams, yet there's almond trees this big for miles. Like, so there's a massive shift from like dairy and horticultural production to more almonds, and there's some vineyards, but it's mainly almond production in the Central Valley. North of San Francisco, I went through the Napa Valley, and yeah, that was interesting but not overly inspiring. But yeah, so the trade war thing was really interesting because we're in China talking to the commodity buyers there, and they said, "Oh, we've been told not to buy anything from the US." This is like the start of the trade war. And then we went to Iowa, which is the number one corn and soybean growing state in the US, and the professor at the university said they have to buy our soybeans. And we said they're not going to. And he goes, no, they have to because they can't get enough of their own. But they bought all the Brazilian soybeans, and then they tanked the American market. So that's what happens when you piss the Chinese off. Like, and I don't think Donald's got that one worked out yet. So where are we heading? Like the trade war, to spend 5 days in Hong Kong, which was the trading hub of Asia, and then go to Shanghai for another 5 days. The Chinese are consciously trying to move the economic power from Hong Kong to China, to Shanghai. And that's why the shit fight that's happening in Hong Kong is happening at the moment, because Hong Kong is their place in the world is being eroded. China wants Shanghai to be the business hub of Asia, and they're going to do it. Like, you go to China, and Hong Kong and Taiwan, they're part of China. There's no question of if it's not. And China's, yes, it's a communist country, but they're complete capitalists with what they're doing. But they are being pulled back. If you're too crooked, you're getting sorted out. So the trade war in the US, the farmers at the time, they weren't too fussed. But like anyone that follows what's going on in the US, like low corn and soy prices are really starting to hurt in the agricultural areas. They're talking now, like a lot of farmers, the indebtedness is increasing, and like land lease prices and land prices are starting to pull back because they've had a couple of years now of low commodity prices. It's really starting to impact on them in a big way. So I think like this game, and I said at the start to some Americans, I said, China can play the long game better than you because they know Donald's only got 2 terms and then he's gone. So the Chinese will just do what they need to do and wear it. And the Chinese have, in the past, they have subsidised corn production in China, and then they pulled that back a bit. So they manipulate things beautifully. And they've been trading with the world forever, so they're smarter at it than most of us, which is pretty scary. But they know how to manipulate markets. Like the wool guys are getting a bit of a tickle up at the moment. So, and you know, I'm sure our barley might be a bit interesting when it comes harvest too, what they decide to do with us there. So the next step on the Nuffield journey, like basically you travel, like last year you compress 4 months of travel into 9 months. So I was really popular at home for a while, not being there. And then last year being a shit year was terrible. But from that process, like the lad, that's obviously me with my fat guts there, and bloke with the big hat, he did the Nuffield scholarship and he's up at Julia Creek. He got about a metre of water over most of his farm, and I thought, what can I do? And I went up there for 2 weeks, and I think while I was up there we did about 13 k's of fence. And I think like there's Blaze Aid people up there and stuff, and I think Sam Newell actually ended up on the same place, like through one of the Blaze Aid programs or something like that. So I sort of figured from doing the Nuffield, I want to, like, you see what happens around the world, and like we have things a bit tough and we whinge, but the people that really need help are the people in developing countries that have got crooked governments and can't feed themselves, and that's where I'd like to do something down the track like this Farmers Without Borders programs and things like that. Would be a great opportunity to go and help in developing countries and help improve agricultural practices to feed people. Like Australians can sort themselves out, but I thought I'd just go help Colin. It's bloody interesting up there having a look around, but he lost about 1,500 cattle and 40 k's of fence, so he burned about $2 million. So that was pretty shit for him. The next one is questions at the end. So there you go. That was in the Department of Agriculture in the US. Get up on the podium. So that's a bit of an overview of what I did in my topic. So if you've got any burning issues, yep.
With the James Boston Fund,
Yep.
were they harvesting whole crop to go into the
Yep. Yep.
digester or,
Yep.
or grape or both?
Yeah. They were harvesting corn and maize,
Yeah.
whole crop and cereal crops as well.
So the whole lot just goes into
Yeah.
the digester?
Oh, it goes into silage bunkers and then into the digester. Like, until you go to Europe, you don't realise like renewable energy in Europe is wind. There's a bit of solar, but it's a bit hard. Like I've got a mate in France who's got a 30 kilowatt system, and I show him what mine's producing in winter, and he goes, "Oh, he's producing nothing just about all winter because it's cloudy." But biodigesters are a massive thing in Europe, and they can produce dispatchable power, so you can control when you did it. Originally, like you see some biodigesters in Australia being built in piggeries to process pig waste, but in Europe they've found that the pig and cow waste isn't the most efficient energy source because it's inconsistent and has rocks and things like that, and rocks in a big thing don't work very well. James Thompson, the manager at Dyson, calls his a concrete cow, so it's just they just feed it green material and generate power. And they were in the process of, and because with a biodigester you generate gas and electricity, but you also generate heat. So in Germany there was, next door to one farm, there was a like poly pipe factory that needed the heat to make their products, and some people also used them to grow vegetables. So Dysons were in the process of building a 10-hectare vegetable growing operation, and the heat from the biodigester would be funneled through pipe system under the ground to maintain a high temperature. So, like, and it's not terribly cheap power. Like it's more expensive than solar or wind, but it is like they have changed when they're delivering that power, so they then can get paid more for it. But yeah, it's like a lot of farms, there's biodigesters everywhere, and it's quite interesting. I think I know Pete Waterwitz has mucked around with trying to do something, but the amount of material that you need to put in them is huge. Like, and last year a biodigester at Langhorne Creek would have been broke because it wouldn't have been able to feed it with anything. So yeah.
Any other questions, Mr. James? It's pretty interesting stuff, right? But,
I'll back up your comments on trade war. I was over in the States in July last year, sort of feeling like that. Every time I got a chance to talk to anyone who's in agriculture, they ask them questions, and they're so polite.
Yeah.
Like culturally, a bit like us, growing up to some degree, we're in the farming industry, we're probably voted more conservative and dead so.
Yeah.
But then once they've put that vote through, they stand by it rock solidly. Like to get them to sway is quite difficult. And I think when I was over there, they were saying, look, it's going to be okay. It'll all work out. We trust him. That's why we voted him in. He's a deal maker. Blah blah blah. And then I've been following the metric too. And this
and Americans are like, you hear about people getting shot and everything, but Americans are really polite, like Zach and I came across. But at the same time, you can walk into Walmart and arm up and then sort everyone out on the way out if you want. like it's just crazy. Like, you can go in the shop. We're in Western Oregon, so we're over the other side of the Rockies, and we asked Zach, because you're allowed to take family members with you on your personal travel, so Zach came with me to America for 3 weeks. We went rafting and asked the guy there, where's the best gun shop? He said, I'll go to this sports shop. There's ARs, pink ARs, there's everything. There's like dummies that can shoot and blood comes out of them. They're just obsessed with guns, which is really, really crazy. But
Does anyone have any questions on guns?
no, but in saying that, the whole Nuffield process for me has been really interesting, and like it's an expectation. Like Primary Producers SA was my sponsor of what I did, even though it did cost me another probably 15 or 20 grand on top of that. So if any of you younger guys, I'm not that young, but if you're involved in production agriculture as a manager of a farm or a farmer yourself, if you've got a topic, I spoke to Jackson, but he hasn't put his hand up yet. Have a crack at it. Yep.
Jane, obviously you did your project on the urban sprawl.
Yep.
And I'm from a vegetable background.
Yep.
So I've seen in Western Australia how divers Wanneroo
Yep.
has become urban sprawl.
Yep.
Virginia now has had that impact.
Yep.
Werribee, Cranbourne, Gatton,
Warrington.
yeah, a lot of areas.
Yep.
Now, I left Virginia
Yep.
in 1998.
Yep.
Didn't want to, but I had to
Yep.
because of circumstances which happened. I had financial debts. I'd rather the bank sell me up. I did what I had to do. I had 40 staff.
Yep.
If I was able to sell, I did a development, got knocked back at council. I would have been able to service my debts for that. I would still be in business,
Yep.
employed 40 people.
Yep.
I put 40 people out of business, so out of work because I had to.
Yep.
So there's a double, obviously I like looking at this.
Yep.
So there's a double whammy. I travel to wherever they do all the digital areas. And a lot of the growers now, they're growing old. Some of them are happy to stay there because their children have stayed on.
Yep.
Not all of them are.
Yep.
So Cranbourne side of Melbourne, the eastern side, that is getting gobbled up very fast. Werribee is being protected a bit. They've created a green belt.
Yep.
But the greatest asset the farm has is its farm.
Yep.
And it's been very good in the last few years. I've seen probably a lot of the areas which I visit. I think they've had 100% growth in the last 10 years in their asset.
Mm-hmm.
But the prices for the goods they grow are going down.
Yeah.
So their margins are not there.
Yeah.
So they want to exercise the right out. What do you think the happy medium? Because you've obviously studied this.
Yeah.
What's the happy medium?
That's the question that people always ask. Like you're saying, you're taking away the farmer's right to sell it for housing. Well, if it's zoned as agriculture, it's agriculture. It's not zoned for housing now. So I'm not proposing to take any rights away from people. I think what needs to happen, if land is identified that needs to be incorporated in urban growth, like in Holland, they've got 15-year plan. Like you, the farmer on the edge of Utrecht or one of the big cities, you're told 15 years time that land will be going. And you get paid full tote odds for that, and then you can go buy more land further away. And it's not, the middleman doesn't make the money like we seem to do in Australia. So I think there needs to be more forward planning about how we do it. So farmer on the edge knows that in 10, 15 years time, yes, they'll be able to sell it, or no, you won't be able to sell it. And it's interesting, in Vancouver, like the small, like 15-acre blueberry blocks and things like that, the value of them has maintained or gone up. But what's happened is a lot of families from Asia and India have come in and bought those and then built really big houses on them. And so that's put the value of that land up, even though it's still in agricultural production, but less of it in it. So that's the whole crux of where it's at. And I think until it's a community's choice to decide if they want to preserve agricultural land or not. And part of that choice is paying more for produce to keep farmers viable on that land. And and in a lot of places you'll see like those small holdings farmed by a bigger operator who can have the efficiencies of scale to make that viable, even when a smaller family unit might not. So yeah, it's complex, and it is something that it's a cultural thing, and it's a community desire to maintain it or not. Like, you look at the figures for Melbourne food production at the moment. I think Melbourne, surrounding Melbourne produces about half of the vegetables in Melbourne. I think by 2050 it'll be about 20%. And so you need to look at the bigger picture. Like we'll sell up and go grow veggies on the Murray in New South Wales, no water. That'll work really well. So, yeah, and it does give people the opportunity if they do sell to develop in new regions. But in New Zealand, like Pukekohe grows, that's about an hour from Auckland. They grow about 25% of Auckland's vegetable production in it, and the land is getting more and more expensive, and developers are pushing hard on that. Some farmers have sold out there more to Southland, south of the South Island. There's about a 500 people labour shortage in that region for horticultural production because they haven't got the people there. So, and then you bring in the recycled water, and should cities be using that to grow horticulture on the edges? That's another question as well. So yeah, there's lots of questions in it, and it needs to be looked at from a pretty holistic point of view.
My perspective is that urban sprawl being fueled by greed, because everyday Australians still can't afford a house.
Yeah.
So really, has it been a good thing? For a few years.
Yes.
But again, everyday, I think it's one of the things impacting very heavily on our economy.
Yeah, and the cost of the urban sprawl in terms of requirement for infrastructure, like roads and rail and stuff, is huge, and that's not counting. Get the mind up in one.
Yeah, no, well, thank you very much,
Yep.
James, for presenting that. Grab the dongle thing. Just saw that tap. Yeah, so pretty interesting stuff, just from a broader agriculture perspective. So, yeah, great for you to share that experience with us. So, yeah, one more speaker to go until 12:30. So we've got Peter Norwood from Full Circle Nutrition. So, again, not so directly Viti related, but yeah, more on that just general soil health and plant health and how that actually impacts on us as people as well as consumers. So yeah, Peter's actually been brought to us by Adam Davies at Terrigen, who came out at the last VitiBucks session. You remember, if you were there, Adam spoke about the Terrigen Biotech's great land product. And yeah, Adam just mentioned after that he had a friend of his, Peter Norwood, to come and talk about this full circle nutrition side of things, and reckons that Peter could talk for hours and hours. We'll let him talk for a while.
Just kick me off when you're ready.
Yeah, so Peter will, pretty interesting stuff. So did you want to put stuff on just on here, or?
No, I'll check up there, yeah.
Jack on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so James, if anyone wants to hit James up afterwards as well, they can always contact him. I'm sure he's got a phone number, or come down through the store or something if they've got anything they want to talk to him about. So,
For giving us the opportunity today. Thanks to Adam Davis from Terrigen as well for putting me up as an opportunity to come and talk to you guys. And thanks so much for you guys for taking the time to come along. It's always busy out in the enterprise, so I always appreciate everyone taking the time. Just a little bit of background on me. I'm an independent consultant, so my wife and I run our own business called Full Circle Nutrition. We're based over in Maffra in Gippsland, and my wife does all the administration in the business. It's just the two of us, so it keeps us pretty busy basically. And we've got an interesting business. We work on everything from the soil, so we measure soil biology, we do soil testing, we do plant tissue testing, we do sap analysis, and we do hair mineral analysis as well. So we actually measure nutrients that are present in the hair of animals and also people. So I do human nutrition as well. So I get to see the whole gamut. And what I want to share today with you is a few observations that suggest that what James just said is exactly right. That we're in a pretty special space at the moment. The world's actually looking for better quality food. We will get paid for that better quality food. We need to get better as marketers, I think, but That's coming too, the opportunity to do that. Just as an example there's a fellow at the moment in New Zealand who's developing a platform. It'll be a blockchain platform where if you were a beef producer, you would say, I've got, say, 20 animals I want to sell. Someone will come onto that platform and they will actually bid to freight those animals for you. The slaughterhouses will come on, they'll bid to do the processing for you. The packaging guys, the same thing. And then if someone wants, a bit of Scotch fillet, they want to buy 5 Scotch fillets, they'll bid to buy those. These platforms are coming, so in terms of farmers being able to market a little bit more effectively for themselves, it's kind of interesting times that we're moving into. So I want to tell you a little bit today about some of the observations I've made in terms of soil chemistry and soil biology and how it's affecting the plants. And I want to tell you a little bit about what James was talking about with this nitrate issue that people are looking at around the world at the moment. There's Big Brother's watching at the moment, and it's a bit of a worry. I've got another one there. Might get it.
Well, maybe did you stop?
No.
Did you stop one?
This is down there.
Are they the same ones?
I swapped the right ones.
Are you sure?
So, I always tell farmers that the difference between a good farmer and a great farmer is making observations. Great farmers make lots of observations and they want to ask questions why. But I think we've got to be honest too sometimes in some of the conclusions that we draw in the way that we look at things. So I went to this guy's place one day, and I couldn't get that soil probe into the ground. I was jumping up and down like a pogo stick. And I had an ex-AFL footballer with me and he couldn't get in the ground either. And I didn't know this guy from a bar of soap, and sometimes that's fairly dangerous when you go there as a consultant because you don't know the person. And he asked me the question, he said, why do you think my ground is so hard? And I said, without even thinking, I said, it's because you have poor soil structure. And he said, that's where you're wrong. I was like, wow, okay. And I said, why do you think? He said, it's because we haven't had enough rain. Well, they'd had 500 mils over the winter, and this was the end of September. They'd had enough rain. So I, unfortunately, burst out laughing, which turned out to be the wrong reaction. And I haven't seen the guy since. So then what I did was I went up the road to a client of mine up the road who'd had the same 500 mils of rain, and we could get the probe straight in. And this guy was struggling to grow grass at all, and this guy was growing an immense amount of grass. And he had the same rainfall, the same grazing management, but what was missing here was soil structure. That's all it was. That was the big issue. So sometimes we've got to be honest about the conclusions that we draw as well. Sometimes we've got soils that are a bit like this, that are cracking and swelling soils. And you can see in this case, there's even moss growing on here. And, if you tried to get your fingers into the soil, you would have broken it. That soil was my soil when I first bought it. It was on a irrigation block. And what irrigators do, they irrigate. So you imagine if you've got a soil that's as hard as that and you're pouring water on it, how effective do you reckon that is? It's not working, is it? And I was growing lots of barley grass and I was struggling to be productive and I was struggling to make money. So there's nothing like having your own skin in the game. You've got to try and find some answers sometimes. So it made me look a lot more deeply into what I was trying to achieve. So when you look at the soil, really what we're trying to get to is about 5% organic carbon if we can in that soil. And we want 25% air and 25% water. 45% of that soil should be minerals. And that's a huge amount, a huge amount. But people get a little bit worried about this initially because the first thing they think about that is cost. But we've got to start asking different questions in agriculture. There's a lot of people in agriculture that are very, very good at cost control, but are not making enough money. And if the commodity price drops, they're in trouble. It's really about profit after cost is what we want to know. And sometimes there's just some basic constrictions in the system that don't allow us to move any further forward. And with a bit of savvy investment, we can start to move forward. So what we really want is this chocolate crumb cake in here. And we want lots and lots of air spaces in there so the water can move through there freely. And we want the biology to be active, and they want some oxygen in that soil as well. we want the plant roots to get down to depth so they can get access to more nutrients. Then we want to see things like earthworms, for instance, in here. So we've got all these aggregates forming. That soil there is the same soil 6 years later, after we've been doing all this work on it. So things can change, and they can change pretty rapidly, and I think you can do it a lot quicker than that, but I didn't have the knowledge back then that I was looking for necessarily. Just a quick little piece on soils. I don't want to labour too much on some of this stuff, but there was a guy called Dr. William Albrecht. Has anyone heard of Albrecht? Awesome. So William Albrecht was an amazing guy. He was based at the University of Missouri. He was the professor of soil science there, the head of the department. He was there from about 1910 through to about 1960. He published 450 peer-reviewed papers. He travelled around the world. He came to Australia. If he had to come here, he would have said to you guys, I want your best soil and your worst soil so that I can do a comparative analysis and work out what's going on. And he used to take soil and he'd go into the laboratory and spin it at 32,000 revs, and he'd pull off the finest of finest clays. And clays have a negative charge attached to them, and those negative charges can attract all the positive charges to them. So he'd pull all the positive charges off, he'd put them back in at a different percentage each time. He'd plant out a soybean plant, and he did that for 40 years until he worked out what grew the best plant. And I think that's pretty significant science. He also correlated, he started out as a soil microbiologist, so he started developing rhizobia, and they would put the rhizobia out in the marketplace, but some farmers would come back and say, look, it didn't work in my situation. And so he'd say to the farmers, he was a little bit belligerent, he'd say, you know, if the cow doesn't get encalfed, you always blame the bull. Maybe it's the environment that you're putting the biology out into. So he started out as a soil microbiologist, and he went down this soil health path because he realised that we had to change the environment to create, hopefully, a better situation for the microbiology, and they would feed the plant themselves. But he said we've got to understand how the plant works. So when you look at a plant, and the same with our cells as well, and the animal cells, our cells are strengthened up in the cell wall by calcium. Calcium is crucial. And in between the cells there's a glue in the plant, it's called pectin, and it's made from calcium and boron. And in us, we've got a glue between our cells, it's called E-cadherin. If we have an issue with our gut, for instance, in our digestive system, we can start to break down our E-cadherin all the time. It forms what's called a tight junction in our gut, and so we start to get all these gut health issues potentially forming. So calcium plays a pretty big role. So he says what the plant does is it says to the soil, hey, I want this calcium, so I'm going to take that calcium, and in exchange I'm prepared to give you, because this has got two single charges, I'm going to give you two single charge hydrogens in return. And so it pulls calcium out, drops the hydrogen off, we go and measure how much hydrogen is there, it's gone up, which means the pH of the soil is gone down. And then normally what people would do is they'd come in with some more calcium, they'd bump the hydrogen off, and so the pH would go up. Happy days. But he said, but we could put sodium into that soil, and that would bump off the hydrogen, and the pH would go up. He said, but the plant doesn't want that, because sodium sits outside the cells and potassium sits inside the cells, and between the two they regulate the fluid pressure into and out of the cell. So it's not all about pH. What he worked out was that pH is what happens at the end. So he worked out that if he could get the soils to about 68% of all these sites on the clays taken up by calcium, and 12% magnesium, and 4 to 5% potassium, and 1 to 2.5% sodium, and what was left over was enough space for 10% hydrogen, which just so happens to be a pH of 6.4, which would keep most agros pretty happy. Does anyone know what the pH of a cow's rumen should be, idea? Any idea? Absolutely. 6.4. Anyone got any idea what pH your blood should be? What about the pH of the sap in the plant? 6.4. It's pretty easy, isn't it? Nature's pretty amazing. Once you understand a little bit about how these things come together, there's lots and lots of replicates in nature, and it makes it really easy to understand, which I think is pretty cool. So, when you start looking at each of these minerals, they have a pretty big effect on the soil's ability to hold on to moisture. So, If you go over to the South Island of New Zealand, you go across to the west coast where they have 3 metres of rain a year, they'll have 300 mils a month quite often. But then you drive up the Grape Valley and the first thing you notice is they've got centre pivots. It tells you that they're having some issues in terms of retaining moisture in their soils over there. It makes you start to ask some questions. So that's the water holding capacity of calcium, that's the water holding capacity of magnesium, that's the water holding capacity of potassium, and that's the water holding capacity of sodium. So if you go past a dairy where they've actually had a reasonable rainfall, often what you'll see is that the paddocks around the dairy where they put their effluent out on and they tend to have a lot of supplement fed to the cows close to the dairy that tends to then allow for accumulation of potassium. What you'll often see is that they're the soils that get waterlogged first after a rain. If you go out from the dairy, quite often that's not the case. On the west coast of New Zealand, they've got really, really low levels of magnesium in their soil. So they can't hold on to water in those soils. And they find that when they put a little bit of magnesium back in, all of a sudden they start holding on to a little bit of water. Over here, in a lot of cases, we've got a lot of calcium, which may mean that we've got some problems with some of these other nutrients perhaps. So getting those back into balance, it creates a much more available amount of water in that soil. And having that right soil structure means that it starts to act like a sponge. It's pretty important. Other things that help build the structure up in the soil, so the calcium's helping to pull together the aggregates in the soil, the clays together. And once you pull two together, you've got a space in between them, so you start to get these pore spaces happening in there. But the bacteria will also build micro aggregates in the soil, and so will the fungi. If you go out in your garden and we've got bark chips out there, we pick them up quite often, they're all strung together. And that's the fungi that's holding it together. They literally wrap around and start to hold everything together. So it's pretty cool, these little guys, and encouraging them is something that we really want to do. But I'll take James's point, because we've been in the same situation where we are in Gippsland, in our part of Gippsland. We've had less than 50% of our rainfall over the last 2.5 years so far. And moisture does matter. So these are bacteria. This is 30% of the moisture holding capacity of the soil. We're at nearly 10 million bacteria. But if we can get up to 80% of the moisture holding capacity, they expand up towards 30 million. It's huge. It's a huge increase with these guys. So they do vary with weather over time. Once again, a little bit of productivity difference. Either of these are a disaster. This is a soil that was laser graded, so we're still flood irrigating in our district. We're probably, after hearing you speak, it's funny, you're so close to something you don't necessarily think about it too much. We've got guys we've got one particular group that have bought 30 dairy farms in our area in the last probably 6 years. We've got vegetables coming into our area. We'd be probably growing 40% of Australia's salads in our area now. And yet we've still got guys out there today that are using these old technologies in terms of laser grading soils and flood irrigation, which is kind of crazy. But I can see after what James said that the land in our area, because we've got a pretty reliable water source out of Lake Maggie, even in a tough year we tend to get, not very often we wouldn't get 100% of our water. I can see the land in our area is going to really ramp up because we're only 2.5 hours from Melbourne. But this was a laser graded paddock. This maize went 6 tonnes to the hectare, absolute disaster. That went 12 tonnes to the hectare, economically still a disaster. But the difference between those two blocks there was that on this block here, he'd sown a oats crop the previous season. He let it get to waist high, and what do you reckon he did with it? Clouded it. That's exactly right. This is what the old people used to do, isn't it? That's what they say. And all that carbon, all that sugar going back into the soil, some amino acids going back into the soil, it's very stimulatory. And then you've got these guys in Modesto, California, who just so happens to have the same sunlight hours, the same heat units as we have at Nuffield, where I'm from. We're growing 18 to 20 tonnes maybe on average, if we're honest with ourselves. They've got water, we've got water, they've got good irrigation systems, we've got guys with pivots too, and they're growing 45 to 50 tonnes of maize silage per hectare. And I got a young student to sit down last year, and I gave him all the maths on it, and I said, work this out. And he sat down and I watched him, and he put his pencil down and he picked it up and he worked it all out again, and then he put it down again. He said, they could have bought the next door paddock out of the profit out of it. And I said, that's exactly right. Productivity is what makes us big, big profits, especially if we're in commodity markets. We need greater productivity, but how do we create that productivity? I think that's really some of the things that we need to flesh out a little bit more. And I would suggest that at the moment, a lot of what we do, no matter what crop you grow, no matter what it is guesswork. And it's only guesswork because you haven't had access to all the information necessarily. So I just want to flesh that out a little bit as we go through. I just want to play this too. This should work, I hope.
George and Gracie will be back in just a moment. In the meantime, I have something here that should be of interest to everyone. Incidentally, it's something of which we at Carnation are very proud. This blue ribbon, recently awarded to Carnation Tip Top. He just won first prize for yearling bulls in Portland, Oregon at the Pacific International Livestock Exposition. Of course, Carnation Tip Top is only one example of many prized Carnation cattle. Here is Tip Top's mother. This is Carnation Homestead Daisy Madcap. She has 4 names, and she's the world's champion producer of butterfat, having produced in 1 year more butterfat than 7 average cows. Enough butterfat to make over 1,700 pounds of table butter. A Carnation milk farm, the home of contented cows, have for many years pioneered in the development of better dairy herds. And as a result, the entire dairy industry, as well as you, the consumer, as a consumer of milk and milk products, have benefited. So it's really no wonder that Carnation, the milk from contented cows, is a standard of excellence throughout the world. And it's with admiration for a job well done that we salute Carnation's newest champion, Carnation Tip Top. And now here's Carnation's own contented couple, George and Grace.
Does anyone know what the average milk production per cow is in Australia at the moment? I know this is not a dairy talk necessarily. Any idea? It's about 500 kilos of solids per cow, or about 6,000 litres is about what the average is. Has anyone seen Carnation milk in the supermarket? The guy who owned this, he was a real entrepreneur. His name was E.A. Stewart. He's a real character. He was a grocer. He sold his grocery store in about 1890. Just to give you an idea of how litigious the US are. Back then he had to sign a non-trading agreement, a 10-year non-trading agreement in his own town. He couldn't start up again. So he moved, he bought this factory, he got it going, he bought it with a partner, nearly went broke in the first 12 months. And then he bought the partner out, he bought a German chemist over, and they got this factory humming. He started making quite a bit of money, and he made the decision he wanted to supply the best quality milk that money could buy into that factory. And he went and set up this herd called the Carnation Dairy Herd. And by the time he got really humming, in 1952, he had 135 cows producing 1,200 kilos of milk solids, or 19,000 litres, in 1952. And if you look at the genetics that we've got these days and you follow it back, technically, a lot of the Dan Holstein genetics that we've got came from this herd. So theoretically, we've actually got better genetics now than what we had back then. What we haven't got is the same management systems happening in our dairies. And whilst these guys milk the cows 3 times a day and it was a TMR ration, it was pretty intense what they were doing, and I'm not suggesting that farmers over here should be doing that. But what I found interesting was that they really understood what made a cow produce milk. And one of the things that they fed a fair bit to cows was actually lucerne. They didn't feed lucerne to a cow because it was a high protein feed necessarily. They fed it because it was really, really high in calcium and magnesium. What's the number one nutrient you think of that we're getting if we're drinking milk? It's calcium, absolutely. There's guys in South Australia now feeding 300 grams of limestone per cow per day to their cows, and noticing that they're getting better milk production if they do that. To make sure that the cow will eat that, because if you think about it, limestone's a rock, they make it into a pellet and they put a sweetener in it. How crazy is that? Now remember what strengthens up the cells and makes them grow? Calcium. Wouldn't it have been smarter to have the calcium coming through into the plant? and they would have grown a lot more forage, which would have been high in calcium, which means they would have got the production. They wouldn't have had to go to all that trouble of putting all that limestone in. Don't you think that makes more sense? We've got to start thinking outside the box a little bit, and sometimes this is where history is pretty cool, because we can just go back and look and learn some lessons from it. They also understood that if they fed beets into their cows back then, that it gave them better health. And that's because beets contain what's called betaine, which is really, really good for our liver. So if any of you guys are going through a patch where you're feeling a bit tired and run down and you're sort of struggling to get going, anyone who used to enjoy a couple of beers when they were younger and now can't, go and make yourself a glass of beetroot juice each day. And hold your nose if you don't like the taste of it. You only need 300 mils, and you'll find in a couple of days you'll start to feel a lot better, and especially if you take some B group vitamins in conjunction with it, because they will really make a big difference, a really big difference to you. And these guys had a really good understanding of this, and they didn't just feed barley to their cows like we do over here. They put in what was called a mixed diverse ration of stuff that fermented really slowly so that these animals were healthy. My point out of all this is we don't know what normal is. And it'll be the same in your industries too. You know, if we've got guys growing 18 to 20 tonnes of maize solids when they could be growing 45 tonnes, boy, that's exciting. If we've got guys doing 6,000 litres when they could be doing 19,000, that's exciting. And these guys had cows there that were 15 to 20 years old on average, which meant they got them back into calf, they didn't have all the animal health issues that we're seeing these days in the industry as well. There was longevity there, which I think is pretty cool. So, I just want to share a little bit of information. I'm sorry, I'm going to throw a little bit of chemistry at you for a second, but it's important that we understand this because most of you guys will look at this initially and go, this is too complicated, and yet you drive your car every day and don't even think about it. But if someone from Uzbekistan rang tonight and said, I want you to tell me how to drive a car, I've never seen one before, can you describe it to me? You'd go, holy dooly, that's complicated. But you didn't learn it all at once, you learn it step by step. So some of this information, the more you get access to it, the more you understand it. This guy here is at Wandello in New South Wales. Really tough area to farm. He's a dairy farmer. Could never ever grow pasture up to the edge of the bush where he is. He's got a lot of bush out there, and now he's growing that sort of pasture there, which is pretty exciting. So basically, we all know sun comes in through the leaf of the plant, whatever plant it might be we're growing, and through chlorophyll we turn that into energy for the plant. And chlorophyll is 4 nitrogens surrounding 1 magnesium. What's the one nutrient that we've focused a lot on, particularly in the last 15, 20 years in Australian agriculture? Nitrogen, isn't it? We went to see someone yesterday who's selling 1 million litres a year of nitrogen. That's a lot of nitrogen, and that's come up from virtually nothing. So there's been a real emphasis on nitrogen, but who measures the magnesium in their pastures or in their plants that they're growing at the moment? And don't feel like you guys are any different to the average. I've probably spoken to 2,000 farmers this year, and I've got the same reaction in every room that I've been to. It's huge. We don't know what's actually driving this system at the moment. So when you go and do your tissue analysis, your magnesium ideally would be about 0.4%. And if you go and start measuring it, you'll be shocked at how much lower than that it is in the plant. But then, once you're over that, you say, you know what, that's a huge opportunity for me to change this. I've just got to drive more magnesium into the system. So this is how photosynthesis works. I don't want to bore you to death. I just want to show you this. It happens in 2 stages here, but there's a whole bunch of stuff happening here that are pretty important. So you've got magnesium, you've got magnesium, you've got magnesium. 3 times we need magnesium in that system. And then we need iron, and we also need iron. And if you've got lots of carbonates in your soils, which you seem to have over this part of the world, carbonates will actually tie iron up. And if they do, it complexes. And if you want to release that, you need some organic acids to split it apart. So if you go and measure your leaf and there's not enough iron in there, then you need to put out some sulfur. And sulfur is going to drive sulfuric acid production. But sulfur leaches. So over time, you're going to have to keep putting some back in. There's a guy called Dr. Selman Waxman, he was a microbiologist in the US. He actually got the Nobel Prize for discovering that horrible pink antibiotic, erythromycin. If anyone ever had that pink liquid when you were a kid. He discovered that. He was an amazing guy. And he showed that if you don't have your sulphur in your soils at 70 to 80 parts per million, you won't have adequate microbiological activity in that soil. And for most of the time, if you go and measure Australian soils, we'll be somewhere around 10 to 12. And we got told, because they did some work at CSIRO in the 1970s, that that's all we needed. That's because all they looked at was sulphur. Well, guess what? Sulphur doesn't just work on its own. You've got all these other things in there as well, which could constrict the productivity out of it. We need some manganese, we need a tiny little bit of chloride, but not much. Right, we need also some copper and zinc in here, which are really important for antioxidants. So this is all taking place in the leaf. We're giving off oxygen, taking in carbon dioxide. We've just solved a big piece of the puzzle for global warming, so I think that's pretty cool. I think we need to put our hand up for this, you guys, and say we're doing a pretty good job here as farmers. We're environmentally sound. We make sugar, which is why people are measuring bricks in tissues these days. It comes through into this whole process here, which is called the Grape cycle. But all that's important to know out of this is that there's some nutrients that make it go from one stage to the next. So you need what's called cysteine, which is a sulfur-based amino acid, which is really important. We need some iron, we need some magnesium, we need some manganese. If you get deficient in magnesium, you start to pick up extra manganese. So if you start seeing manganese toxicities coming through, it's telling you you're having an issue with getting magnesium into that plant, and we've got an issue with chlorophyll production. We need some B group vitamins. I just told you guys to take some B group vitamins. That suggests, doesn't it, that you're not getting enough B group vitamins out of the food that we're growing, and it will not be there in the food that we're growing unless we've got enough boron and enough magnesium coming through in the system. Boron leaches, so you have to keep putting it on if it's not there. Down the bottom we make energy called ATP, and that comes in the top here, which drives another cycle. It's called the GOGAT cycle, which makes amino acids and proteins, and this is where the rubber meets the road. This is pretty crucial, this stuff. This is one of the reasons why we're all being told not to eat red meat at the moment, which is kind of crazy. That's because things are out of balance. This is this cycle. So in the plant, you take up nitrogen in the form of ammonium, and you might take up nitrate, and you can take up also amino acids as well. But the ammonium comes in, as long as there's enough energy coming down from on above, from the Grape cycle, we make amino acids and proteins, happy days. There's two things in nature that we need to survive. We need glucose, well, fats, and we need these proteins. They're really, really crucial. And then we've got nitrate. So 30% of this guy should have been converted into that by nitrifying bacteria in the soil. But I call these guys Goldilocks. You know, it's got to be just right. It's too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry. They don't work for us. If we get the nitrate in there, we go through this stage here, which is called nitrate reductase, which makes nitrite. And from there, we go back here and we make amino acids. If we don't make amino acids, what we're actually consuming is high levels of nitrogen. And this is a bit of a concern. If you go and do a tissue analysis on nitrates, the most you need to grow, if you're growing pasture for instance, is 500 ppm. If you get above 2,500, it'll start becoming poisonous to cattle. I've measured salads, things like lettuces, spinach, at 15,000 ppm. Now here's the interesting thing, I like making observations. Who likes going to the pub and having a steak for dinner? Who orders salad because they think they should? Some chips. Who eats the salad? Not that many anymore. Why don't we eat the salad? You walk through the pub, I couldn't tell you how many plates you see where the salad's sitting there. We haven't eaten it. Why haven't we eaten it? Any guesses? It doesn't taste that good, does it? It's bitter. Nitrates make it bitter. And so does potassium and phosphate if it's out of balance. So it just amuses the hell out of me. I've got a neighbour across the road. He's a big salad grower. He sells all this food. He makes a lot of money out of selling it, and no one eats it at the other end. But he can't keep up with the supply. It's just fascinating to me. Don't you think that's interesting? If we've got all this soluble nitrogen going into an animal, what happens, and this is the same in us, is it goes to the liver, and in the liver we've got to break it down and we excrete it out. And it goes through what's called the urea cycle. And the number one nutrient that's needed in that urea cycle is an amino acid called arginine. And if you don't have enough boron going through from your soil into the plants, you will not have arginine in there. In fact, Dr. William Albrecht did work where he showed you could take it from 2.88 up to about 4 ppm once he put boron out. So I do a fair bit of work in New Zealand. You know, they're the clean green grass growing capital of the world. So I go over there and I measure some amino acids. They're down as low as 0.99 arginine. So he started at 2.88 and he took 4, they're at 0.99. Now over there, what they do now is they measure what's called milk ureas, because the nitrogen in that animal's blood is directly related to what's happening in the milk. And I heard this was coming, and I told all the producers that I work with over there, big brother's watching you guys, you're about to be told how much nitrogen you're allowed to put out. Because they're worried about that nitrogen coming all the way through the cow and going out into the waterways, and it's happening. It's absolutely happening, and they've got beautiful rivers over there. No farmer wants that. They want that nitrogen to be made into milk production, for instance. But it'll only be made into milk production if they're making amino acids, and they're stuck right here. And in the springtime now, you'll measure these massive milk ureas coming through over there. And they get rain, unlike us. And if boron's really crucial to make arginine, for instance, and if boron's really crucial to make sure that we're making some of these other amino acids in the plant, and they get rain and it leaches, what do you reckon they're really short of over there? Well, absolutely. That's exactly right. Now, if we don't have enough arginine, and if we go and eat a steak that's really, really dense in terms of protein, then we'll have the same thing start to happen. We'll have ammonia building up in our blood. And if we have ammonia build up in our blood too high, it's seen as a foreigner by our white blood cells, and we'll send them out there as the army to fire off ammo at whatever foreigner's out there. And what they're firing off is what's called free radicals. And these guys are oxygen species that steal all the charges off the cell wall, and as they do, they'll cause the cell wall to collapse. Now, that's a bug. If that's a bacteria, a virus, or a fungus that's out there, that's great, it kills it. But if that's something like ammonia, that's not even alive. What gets damaged is us. And so eventually, disease starts to break out in our body. So now we're being told, oh, hello, there's a correlation between anyone who eats lots of red meat and potential for disease happening in the body. But I'm going to tell you it's the same with vegetables as well. It's just that we're eating a lower protein density with vegetables, so they don't see the same direct correlation. But the correlation is really this, is that we never grew plants in the first place that took the nitrogen from here to here, and we're missing these things. And this stuff's really, really crucial. It affects our brain, it affects the way we think. You know, we've been brain fog, we start to forget things. We get tired as we get older. Everyone just accepts these things, but it doesn't have to be. And us as farmers can be growing better quality food, making a lot more money because we're a lot more productive if we just understand how some of these pieces of the puzzle fit together. So I think this is pretty cool because nobody loses out of this, we all win. It starts to drive things forward in a nice way. But to understand it, you've sort of got to work out that there is a hell of a lot of nutrients in this whole system. A lot of nutrients. Guess what? If you haven't got them, you've got to put them out there. And it costs money to do that, but at the end of the day, you'll be rewarded because you'll get much greater productivity out the other end. And that becomes obvious once you start to see some of these things missing. So, I just want to share a few observations with you too, because it's not as simple as just having something out of the soil necessarily either. Sometimes there's other interfering forces. This is a lucent paddock, as you can see, and we've got a really good growing bit here and a really poor growing bit here. And here's me trying to take a soil test, jumping up and down like a poker stick again. And you watch when I pull this soil out. I can't get the probe into the ground. And you watch the colour of this soil. Grey, horrible, claggy stuff. Hardly any humic acid, which gives it that nice dark colour happening in that soil. Right, here's 5 metres away. Chalk and cheese. Same management system, same watering system, same nutrient supply, complete difference. That's why I think these things are cool, because you can measure them these days, which is what Dr. Albrecht did. So we started looking into some of the biology that was there in that soil. And what was fascinating is you can do these tests now, they're called PLFA tests, called phospholipid fatty acid tests. Ironically, I sent them to the University of Missouri, where Dr. Albrecht used to work. And they measure the fatty acids, so all of our cells contain fatty acids. And each of these biology contains slightly different fatty acids, so they can measure that now and tell you how much biology is there, which is pretty cool. And what we found is when we started looking through all these groupings of biology, that fungi in this particular soil, there was a 300% difference between the poor sample and the good sample of the soil. And when we get these back, they nominate them as where the fat chain lies, and this was called 182W6C, which is the main one that was out of balance here, which just so happens to be Pythium, which is a fungal root disease. And Pythium in the broadacre crops leads to rhizoctonia becoming a big issue. So all of a sudden you start to make some pretty interesting observations that correlate with these things being out of balance. So if these things are out of balance, what do we do about it? Well, we have to create a better environment for a start. And once we start to create that better environment by improving the soil structure, a lot of these things start to disappear. But we've also got to have a better understanding of the pathogens in the soil and how we can compete with those pathogens if we put enough good guys out there. So I started looking into this lactobacillus bacteria that Adam's company has developed called Grape, and I found that they had a claim for Pythium when I went back and had a look through their patents. And so we went out, we put this stuff out, I sprayed it out twice in about 8 weeks, and this is a young uni student I had with me, and we completely evened up that lucerne in that time period, in 8 weeks. We changed it from being completely diseased to starting to grow better. It's not perfect, you can see there's some yellow in the lucerne there. That's because we've still got to change some chemistry stuff there. He had an excess of potassium in this paddock, which is why it used to tend to become more waterlogged. But when we looked at the nutrients in there, that was pretty hard to pick a difference. It was only the biology that was the big difference there. I was going to skip through some of this stuff. I'll explain that to you quickly. In my irrigation block where I was, you saw how hard my soil was. If your soil goes periodically waterlogged, you'll remove all the oxygen out of that soil, and if you do, iron that was insoluble in that soil becomes very, very soluble and will come through into the plant, and will come through at toxic levels potentially. And this was 2 irrigated paddocks of mine, and this was a dryland paddock that I put in water, and the iron in the lucerne that I was growing should have been between 100 and 150 parts per million. This one was 640, this was 534. And where it was dryland, it was 100. Now when iron builds up in the plant, if it builds up at a toxic level, it creates those free radicals that damage the cell membranes, and that's the sort of thing it looks like. And you'll see it often in Australia, this sort of damage happening. And if that's happening, obviously I'm losing a lot of productivity out of that plant as that's happening. It's pretty crucial. And yet I was causing that through my irrigation technique, which obviously wasn't very good. So it's a matter of understanding there's some practical outcomes to some of this stuff. If you have a plant that's under stress, and for the croppers in the room, I just went to the Vic No-Till conference a couple of weeks ago. One thing that every speaker spoke about was stem frost. They're starting to have lots and lots of issues with stem frost coming forward in the crops at the moment. And that means that that plant's getting under extreme stress, obviously. And I went back and had a look through some of the literature, and I found this on kelp. You know, one of the funny things is a lot of the techniques that the gardeners use in their garden, we tend to ignore. You know, that's just what we do out in the garden. But if you think about, you know, one of the most productive plots of land you've ever seen, I'd have to say it was my grandfather's vegetable patch. It was just unbelievable the stuff that he used to grow out of there in terms of yield. And one of the things he used to use a lot of was kelp. And now I know that kelp increases the antioxidant capacity in the plant by 640%. What does that mean? Well, it means that any of those free radicals, it'll donate the charges back to them and turns them into water. It stops them from damaging the leaves. So all of a sudden we've got this opportunity to take the stress off the plant. We're talking to a vineyard agro yesterday, and he was saying he had a client who was going organic, and he had all this cooch growing in the vineyard, and the plants were under an enormous amount of stress, and he just went and got some kelp, and he sprayed out 5 litres per hectare on this one row, and then he got the guy to go out and just pick any bunch he wanted out of that row, and then any bunch out of any other row. And the row that he sprayed the kelp out was a full 2 Beaumay more in that row. He said he couldn't believe it. And he said that's when he understood that if you had a stressful condition, that you could actually use a few tricks to help you get around it. One of the things that we have in our soils, we have a lot of nutrients in there that can be locked up. I don't know if you guys know this, but 90% of the phosphorus that's been applied to our soils over time, this is what the literature says now, 90% of that phosphorus has been tied up. It's complexed in that soil. It could be complexed with calcium maybe for you guys, it could be complexed with iron, it could be complexed with aluminium in the soil. And if you want to release it, what you need is organic acids. And organic acids can come from a few different places. They could come from nitrogen, making nitric acid in the soil, which is one of the big benefits of nitrogen. It could come from sulphur, making sulfuric acid in the soil. We've seen a lot of soils that we've been looking at that are very low in sulphur over here. It could come from the organic acids being made by the biology. So the biology are pretty crucial. This guy here we're back to a dairy farm for a second, but he had cows that if he didn't feed limestone into the water trough of the cows, they'd start dying. He rang me up and he said, what do you reckon that means? I said, I think you've got a really severe calcium deficiency in your soils. So we went and soil tested. We went and put out 6 tonnes per hectare of lime on these soils, which is a lot. And then we went and measured the soil, the tissue that was growing on the plants that were growing in that soil. Cows need about 0.6 to 0.8% calcium, and the calcium coming through in the pasture over the next few months was 0.45. So that's pretty disappointing, isn't it? Put all this calcium out there and it's not coming through. And one of the things that's happening over here, by the looks, is that for the beef producers, they're having big issues with grass tetany, and yet they've got oodles of magnesium in that soil. It's not the plant. So there's always a reason. There's got to be a reason why. So what we did, we're at 0.45 here, is we went and put some sulphur out, because sulphur will make sulfuric acid and will release some calcium maybe. And sure enough, we took it from 0.45 to 0.52, but we're not on the scale yet. And so then what we did was we split this paddock, and on this half of the paddock, we put just the sulphur. On this half of the paddock, we put sulphur plus these bacteria, these lactobacillus bacteria that can produce organic acids. And we went straight from 0.52 to 0.7, right where we wanted to land, in 3 weeks. Now, I've been doing this job for a fair while. 24 years I've been out in the field, and I've never seen anything like that before. All of a sudden I started to understand that we've got some pretty big interactions here between the chemistry and the biology, and it starts to get pretty exciting. These are the soil tests. We start at 43.5% calcium. And then we put it on in about October, November, that was August. By the following March, we went down to 42.62. And I rang the guy up and I said, look, this is pretty disappointing. And he says, what are you worried about? He says, it's got to be out there somewhere. So then we put the sulphur on. We went to 45.5. Then we put the biology on, we went straight up to 62.5, which is pretty cool. And that was the pasture before and after. Just immense differences. Mycorrhizal fungi, you all know about mycorrhizal fungi. Great, that's easy. So these guys are fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Now, this is a bit of interesting research. So this shows that if we increase the density of mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, it'll actually, and we increase their diversity, it'll increase the length of them. So in other words, the more of them, the better they grew. That is directly correlated positively with the biomass of the plant, so the plant grew better. Directly correlated with the root biomass, so that grew better. Directly correlated positively with the uptake of phosphate in the plant. Directly negatively correlated with soil phosphate. So in other words, if we keep pumping soil phosphorus and 90% of it's getting tied up and we're not getting enough through into the plant, at the same time we're also sending the signal, hey, we don't need so much mycorrhizal fungi in there anymore. And that could be an issue because here's nitrogen uptake into the plant. This is no mycorrhizae versus a number of different mycorrhizae. Here we are at 0.26 nitrogen, up to as high as 0.62 into the plant, so more than 3 times. Phosphate went from 1.4 up to as high as 20. But in our part of the world, we have a big issue with aluminium. aluminium toxicity, pruning the roots. The aluminium went from 10.4 down to as low as 1.6. So not only were these guys driving more nutrients that we want into the plant, the ones that we didn't want, they were keeping them out. And that's exactly what Albrecht said would happen. He said the biology will feed at the table first, and then they will drive the nutrients that are needed into the plant. And as an agro, I'm pretty attracted to that, because that means I don't have to do anywhere near as much work. If I can get these guys working for me, I just need to make sure that they're nice and healthy. So this is my crop. Don't laugh, it's not very good. We've had terrible rainfall over our way, and this was 2 seasons ago. I put in some sorghum, and we did get some rain. We got 70 mils in November and 30 mils in December, but it was so hot and so windy we had about 250 mils of evaporation, and that's as good as it got. I got the irrits with it, and I cut it, and then between January and March we had 35 mils of rain, and that's it. And I said to my wife, our farm's about 5 minutes away, I said, do you want to go and have a look at the farm? She goes, I said, well, I'll go and have a look and I'll take a photo. When I got back, she said, how's it look? And I said, well, you know what? I don't think it looks too bad for 35 minutes of rain. And the only way I can rationally explain that is to explain that what I did between January and March is to apply some of these bacteria. I thought, what the hell? I'm just going to throw them out there and see if it works. And these guys are what's called facultative anaerobes. They're real tough guys. So they'll survive in very, very tough conditions. And I went and did some measurement. So I did some PLFA testing, and I tested in December and I tested in March, and the gram positives that I put out went up by 22%. I didn't think that was too bad because I'd had, only 35 mils of rain. But the mycorrhizal fungi went up by 67%. And I didn't put any mycorrhizal fungi out there. And that starts to spark, a bit of interest. Because we've always been told that if they're not there, you just have to go and put them on. But what I found this paper on bacillus type bacteria, all these facultative anaerobes. And it turns out that what they can do is produce a sugar, it's called raffinose, and that sugar will actually feed the mycorrhizal and keep them going even if they're not associated with the root system. And that's immense, because there's not a very clear understanding of that in the biological world at the moment. So what I've come to gather is that these guys are a bit like the SAS. They can go out there, they're really tough, they'll set up camp, they start feeding the next tier of biology. They're right at the start of the pecking order, and they keep these guys going. And I think that's pretty cool. Right, I just want to show you just a couple of other things that we've noticed. This is a paddock that was, these are PLFAs, biology tests. This is a paddock that wasn't treated, this is a paddock that was. This is once again a dairy farm. I know it's not what you guys are looking at, but it all works the same way. Here we are at 8,300 mycorrhizal fungi versus 16,000. Huge increase where he put the biology out. And once again, he didn't put any mycorrhizal fungi out. But for dairy farmers, and perhaps in just about every other avenue of agriculture, what would be really cool is if we could get some more nitrogen fixation happening in that soil. We've got 78% nitrogen above us in the atmosphere. We can get it fixed through our legumes, through the rhizobia, but there's also other bacteria out there. So there's things like azotobacter, for instance, that'll fix nitrogen in the soil for us. Actinomycetes can help out as well. But they're in a group called the gram-negative bacteria. And this guy was applying gram-positive bacteria, and here's the gram-negatives. He's gone from 61,000 up to 126,000. That's a huge, huge improvement. And one of the things we noticed on the soil test, when we got the soil test back, that the cobalt, which should be 1 to 2 parts per million in the soil. Has anyone measured cobalt on their soil test? No, there's not many people who do. And the cobalt, you need to test it in your also in your tissue test as well. It's really, really crucial for nitrate reductase, and it stops the plant from maturing early. We came past a paddock just up the road earlier. There's barley grass that's going ahead here already. And I've noticed it's coming in earlier and earlier and earlier. The plant maturity hormone is called ethylene. Now when I was a kid, the croppers would always be worried about running into Christmas with harvest. Now everyone up where I'm from, up near Dubbo, they're all done by the first week of December, regardless of the season, whether it's a good season or a bad season. It's just an observation. But one thing that they might not be aware of is that ethylene, which is the maturity hormone, so you know when we have green bananas and we spray them and they go yellow, that's ethylene that they're spraying out. That is driven by methionine, which is one of those amino acids in the plant, being converted across into ethylene. And what slows it down is if you have enough cobalt in the system. So if we've got all these things that are coming in earlier and earlier, there's often a reason why. So anyway, this guy had cobalt to burn here. He had 3.87 ppm. And I've actually soil tested the next door property, and it looks like it's a locality thing there. So they're on a basalt volcanic soil. It looks like naturally they've got a lot of cobalt there. This is the paddock that he didn't put any biology on. We've still got 3.87 cobalt the next year. But the paddock that he did put the biology on went from 1.99 down to 0.86 in 1 year. In other words, the biology just chewed up this cobalt like you wouldn't believe. It's just an observation. You see enough of these things over a while, you start to see some patterns happening. So I wanted to know why. Why are they chewing up all this cobalt out in the soil? And it turns out that cobalt's used by things like azotobacter to fix nitrogen in the soil. And here we've got nitrogen being fixed at less than 0.9 up to greater than 1.8. So in other words, we more than doubled the amount of nitrate coming through in that soil, the amount of nitrogen being developed in that soil, if we had up to about 2 parts per million of cobalt, and obviously we go too far as well. So then theory says that we should be seeing more of this nitrogen coming through in the tissue of the plant. And this guy's a really interesting character. He's German, he's very fastidious, he knows his stuff inside out, and he told me that if he puts out urea, he puts out 80 kilos per hectare, he doesn't grow enough. If he puts out 120 kilos per hectare, he doesn't grow any more. So he puts out 100 kilos per hectare per month of urea. He's in the Western Districts, so it's a lot of nitrogen that he's using. And in the pasture plant, when you go and measure it, you want about 500 parts per million of nitrate in there. And when we went and measured it, it was 559 where he hadn't been putting on this biology. And that blew me away, because he never would have measured this ever. But he just knew through experience that that grew a lot of grass for him. But when we put the biology out, it came out at 1,550. It was 3 times the amount of nitrogen coming through. Now that was a pretty difficult conversation, because he's a guy used to using a lot of nitrogen. So we start talking about what are we going to do about this, and his wife jumped in. She says, Jakob, we are going to cut our nitrogen back. He says, oh, I don't know. She says, yes, I do not want any sick cows. He says, oh, okay. He cut his urea back to 40 kilos. He's been doing that for the last 4 months. He's been measuring. He's growing more grass there than when he's been growing at 100 kilos without using the biology. And that's pretty exciting stuff, getting some free kicks. Right. This is my paddock once again. So this is a month ago. And we've had hardly any rain this year over our way. But you can see that there's a greater density here than there is here. What I've done here is I've put on the bacteria and I like to put on some stimulants with it. So one of the things that the bacteria love, and all the biology for that matter, just like us, is amino acids. So I've been putting it out with some fish hydrolysate. See, we started to play around with what my granddad was doing in his garden. And it makes sense, because amino acids are very, very key fuel to all our survival. And I've been chucking out a bit of kelp with it, because that takes the pressure off the plants as well. And I accidentally put on double the amount here. So I then did some tissue tests on it, and I found that I had the perfect amount of ammonium and nitrate coming through here. And I have not applied any nitrogen to that paddock in 12 months, because I wanted to see if you could get away with not doing that. This is pretty crucial. I'm going home silage. I want to make a quid this year. I've got a crop off for the last 2 years because it's been so dry. So I'm getting a little bit concerned about it. So this was an accident. I didn't mean to, and I slowed the sprayer right down and I put double the rate on here. So then I went out and I sprayed the rest of the block again with this combination. And that was what the leaves looked like at the time. Now that's double the production, isn't it? Don't you reckon that's exciting if you can double your production? And it didn't cost me a lot of money to do it either. That's 1 month later. Now you can't tell the difference between the two. And that makes me pretty excited, because I know I'm going to get a pretty good harvest this year. especially if we have a bit more rain in the next week.
What's your carbon levels? What's your carbon levels?
That's a really good question. I'm going to tell you a horrible story here. I'm going to pull it out of the fire. So I started about 3.4% organic carbon. So this is a white sand where I am. And in fact, you know, you guys got non-wetting sands over here. Part of this is a non-wetting sand. I couldn't grow anything on it at all. And so I started 3.4%. There was native grass like that. There's 109 acres here. There was 15 steers running around before I bought it, and they were starving. They weren't getting any nutrition out of it at all. The only machine I had that could deal to stuff that was that tall was a rotary hoe. So I rotary hoed sand. Guess what happened to my organic carbon levels? So I went down to 2.8%. It's pretty nasty, isn't it?
That's good.
That's good. Then I started putting, I put my chemistry in, so I balanced out what I need on the soil test. I put chip manure out there, and obviously I started playing around with this biology. I took it straight back to 3.4% within 12 months, and this year I'm at 4.8%. So I'm now 1.4% above where I started by sand within 3 years. So you can absolutely have a huge impact on your organic carbon in the soil. Absolutely. And I've seen lots of soils, I haven't seen any from here, but I've seen soils through the Riverland that are down around, you know, 1s and 2s at the most. If you go to some of the cropping areas, you know, like Wagga, it's a strawberry patch, they're at 2%. How can you hold on to moisture and maintain a really great biological population with those really low organic carbons? But this is a chicken or the egg. So 90% of your organic carbon comes from having a really active root system. And if we don't have the nutrients to feed those guys, or the biology to feed the nutrients into the root system, we're not going to have a really active root system, so then we're not going to have the biology. So we keep going around in circles. So what we're doing is we're breaking that cycle, is we're putting out some chemistry for these guys. So if you don't have enough cobalt in your soil, you're not going to have this biology. And yet no one's measuring it, so they don't know what they got. If you don't have enough boron at 2 parts per million, then you're going to cut back the main biology that releases phosphate in that soil by 65%, for instance. So it's pretty cool. So now, talking about these non-wetting sands. First time I come over here, which was only a few months ago, Adam said, do you know anything about non-wetting sands? I said, only what I've seen at my place, that's all. So, but once you know what questions to ask, a lot of research has been done on this stuff. So I went and started doing some research into it, and it turns out that what they've worked out is that in the majority of non-wetting sands, there's a huge overburden in those soils of fungi. Have any of you seen fungi under a microscope? Let me just show you this. Oh, by the way, that's rhizome in a paddock. This is at Wagga, and that's it recovering after we put out the bacteria and the fish in the coat. This guy said he's never seen that in 20 years. He's been looking for stuff for 20 years. And he's been playing around with lots of different things. Once you can start to get ahead of things, it gets pretty exciting. I just want to show you, I'll just move this forward and I'll show you just these fungi. This guy starts off with just water. He adds in compost, so adds in some biology, if you like. And then he's got fish hydrolysate in it. So remember the amino acids. And if I just go back here for a second, just here you'll see that that's yeast. The little black dots are bacteria, and then you've got the start of a fungal strand happening there. He adds in the fish, which is amino acids, and see these fungi starting to grow? So I've got fungi starting to really get going here. And then you watch, I'll take this up to 48 hours. There's only 48 hours after he did it. You look how big these guys are starting to get to now. And he's going to draw back in a second. See all these little bacteria running around here everywhere? He's really started to get them cracking. And then
Here at 48 hours, you see some
come up here.
compost mix.
You watch as he draws back. You look at the fungi here.
Density. Zooming out as far as I can there. And then just look at this.
That's all fungi.
Dense fungal hyphostructure.
Now remember what the cell walls are made out of? dense layer of fat like that, what do you reckon it's going to do to water? It's going to repel it, isn't it? So in our part of the world, we've got the opposite problem. You know, we haven't got enough fungi. So we're trying to stimulate these guys. Fungi love calcium, and you guys tend to have a bit more calcium than we do, say for instance, over our way. So then I went and looked up to see whether anyone had ever done anything to balance these guys out with bacteria, because that's the opposite of fungi. Putting a bit of bacteria out there. And guess what? The experiment's been done. They went out and they put out lactobacillus, which is what's in Adam's product. And in all soils but two, they improved the water penetration in those soils just by putting the bacteria out. I think that's pretty solid. There's a lot of land over here that everyone's having trouble with. And I remember coming across, probably 15 years ago, and people had just started delving and shifting, bringing clays back up. I can't think, but now I wish someone had just worked this out back then. You know, it would have saved a lot of people a lot of money. So we're going to do an experiment now. We're going to do a trial where we're actually going to show that we can do something about this, because we will be able to. It's just an imbalance in nature. And once you understand a little bit about nature, you can start to make changes to things. So I'm going to knock off there. I've probably covered more than my hour, I'm sorry, but hopefully you found that a bit interesting. Hopefully it's a little bit challenging in terms of making you think a little bit differently, but hopefully also, you know, with the guys from FPAG, because they're keen to do a lot more of this measurement and really deliver you guys a fabulous service of providing this information back to you, you're going to get a much clearer and more concise idea that you've got a much greater opportunity to grow not only more produce, but better quality. And there's a huge market out there that's screaming for this now. And guys like James have travelled the world and seen that market. It is immense. It's absolutely immense. If you look at the Chinese market, if we stay on their right side, I'll just tell you one quick story. A guy went out to dinner one night. He was in the pharmaceutical industry. They were making a calcium supplement, ironically. And he wanted to flog it to this guy. And over there they've got what's called Daijos. So a Daijo is a major player who is like an agent, if you like, to extend out to a big wide network. And this guy says they went out for dinner, and the guy says, how many units of this product do you want to sell? He said, I'd love to sell 200 grand's worth. And he said, rightio, and he gets his smartphone out, and he goes onto an app, it's called WeChat, and he puts it on the WeChat, and he says, I'll tell you what, he said that'll be sold by dessert. And the guy said, he was absolutely full of crap. He said, we never even made it past entree. He sold the whole bloody lot. It's immense, absolutely immense. We've got a huge opportunity if we're really smart. And we've got clean green credentials still at the moment, so we've got a massive opportunity. So I'm really excited about agriculture, and hopefully you guys are too. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.